Chapter 421, Spirit Sealing Pillar. In the distant sky at an unknown time, a huge cloud of insects spanning over 100 meters had appeared, staining that part of the sky gold and silver. The huge buzzing seemed to be coming from this new cloud of insects. Underneath the insect cloud, Han Li looked at the eccentric with a gaze as if he were looking at a corpse. He commanded, "Go." Suddenly, the huge insect cloud flew towards the eccentric as an overbearing sky-shrouding shadow. The eccentric's limbs grew ice gold. This insect cloud was over 10 times larger than the previous. It wasn't something he could withstand. In his terror, he felt a sudden desire to flee. With an unsightly expression, he recalled his transformed flower basket. He then struck his two ghost heads with blood-red magic seals and began to chant a cryptic incantation. As for the weapons that were disabled and had been held within the white mist, they were tossed away without hesitation. The eccentric's decisiveness surprised Han Li. The two ghost heads madly spat out several more wisps of flames as they retreated, but Han Li wasn't about to let them slip away so easily. Under his command, the huge insect cloud thoroughly drowned the ghost heads and their flames in an instant. The flames were cleanly consumed by the several tens of thousands of gold-devouring beetles in an instant, and the ghost heads themselves were filled with countless gold-devouring beetles. With this, Han Li knew that the skulls were already finished, but just as he wanted to collect the gold-devouring beetles and go chase after the eccentric, he heard two enormous explosions. The two ghost heads had self-detonated in twin blazes of green flame, engulfing a large portion of the gold-devouring beetles. Han Li was initially left reeling by the scene, but that soon disappeared. From his mental connection, apart from the several hundred closest to the heart of the explosion, a vast majority of his gold-devouring beetles were unscathed. It seemed that these immature gold-devouring beetles were not invulnerable. After a certain limit, they were still capable of being destroyed. However, their sturdiness was already much to Han Li's satisfaction. After all, the gold-devouring beetles only suffered damage from the extremely powerful detonation of the ghost heads. He was confident that any common core formation cultivator wouldn't stand a chance against these insects. With that thought, Han Li wordlessly turned into an azure streak and collected his gold-devouring beetles before chasing after the eccentric. Han Li's thoughts were quite simple. Since deep hatred was planted between him and the eccentric, it was naturally better to settle this problem once and for all. Not wanting to leave a potential enemy, he couldn't allow him to easily escape. A second later, Crooked Soul joined him and flew next to Han Li as a streak of yellow light, joining in the pursuit. As for the others, they glanced at each other while staying in their original places. It seemed that, for the time being, they were incapable of believing that Han Li had single-handedly forced the eccentric to flee. The eccentric's escape method was quite impressive. Even when using the entirety of his strength to propel his green brilliance dagger, the distance between them was only gradually increasing. In the blink of an eye, the three had traveled over 20 kilometers and were about to leave the scope of the barren island. Seeing this, Han Li's eyes glinted with cold light. After taking a deep breath, 7 palm-sized emerald green swords suddenly shot from his body. After flying a circle around his body, the small swords merged into a huge green sword. With a blur, Han Li and Crooked Soul arrived on the huge sword. It then flashed with green radiance and cut through the sky as an emerald streak of light that was nearly 40 meters long, increasing their speed by nearly 50%. After the time it took to make a cup of tea, Han Li had caught up to the eccentric. After seeing the black light that was singularly focused on flying, Han Li waved his arm with an icy expression. 2 small emerald swords shot towards it along with Crooked Soul's immemorial bowl. The escaping eccentric had clearly seen that his relentless pursuers had released their magic treasures towards him. He immediately responded by throwing a skull towards them. Afterwards, the eccentric continued flying without looking back. According to the eccentric's thoughts, the skull should be able to buy him some precious time at the very least. Han Li's expression darkened, and he silently cast an incantation gesture. His 2 flying swords then flashed with green light and turned into 4 swordlights which were indistinguishable from one another. 2 of these swordlights in the immemorial bowl flew straight towards the skull, while the other 2 swordlights combined to form a foot-long flying sword. It rushed past the skull and shot towards the back of the eccentric without a sound. The flying sword became much faster after combining together and arrived behind the eccentric in the blink of an eye. However, the eccentric felt that something was amiss and turned his head. discovering an emerald streak of light that was only 15 meters away from him. The eccentric's face turned deathly pale. Responding quickly to the emergency, he opened his mouth and spewed a puff of black chi towards the flying sword. Afterwards, he hastily flew away, wanting to escape. Under Han Li's command, the flying sword continued straight through the black chi without any hesitation. As it approached, an arc of faint golden lightning struck the black chi and thoroughly blew it away, leaving the flying sword completely unobstructed. Then with a flash of green light, the emerald flying sword pierced through the eccentric. The eccentric looked down at the flying sword in his chest with an expression of complete disbelief. Without the chance to say a single word, he was struck with faint golden lightning and turned to ash. And Li hastily approached. After blurring a few times, he reappeared with 3 items in his hands and focused his attention on them. Apart from the flower basket ancient antiquity, there was also a storage pouch and a scroll painting sparkling with red light. From paintings stealthily contained spiritual chi, even if it wasn't a desolate antiquity, it was still undoubtedly an unordinary magic treasure. Delighted, Han Li gently unrolled the scroll and was soon stunned. After staring at the scroll for a long while, Han Li slowly rolled it back up and wore a contemplative expression. Forcefully suppressing the suspicions he had in mind, Han Li flew towards the skull in silence. Now lacking a master, the black skull floated in the air without movement. Although it still retained a trace of its evil chi, it now completely lacked any trace of its former intelligence. After taking a look, Han Li slightly frowned. In truth, this was the first time he had seen an item like this. He faintly felt that this item definitely had a bad history, but he still felt reluctant to just let it go. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to store it in a jade box. After circling around the area once more, Han Li flew back with Crooked Soul. On the way, he encountered Jin Qing and the others who on their way to assist him. Having seen Han Li and Crooked Soul return completely unharmed, they crowded around him in pleasant surprise. "Fellow Taoist Han, what happened to that eccentric? Did he escape?" Jin Qing couldn't help but ask. "He died by my hand," Han Li calmly said. "He's dead, that's great. From his profuse evil chi, we would have definitely found ourselves hopelessly entangled if he decided to pursue us in the future. That would have proved to be extremely troublesome." Jin Qing replied with a large breath of relief. With slightly changed expressions, the nearby Hu Yue and cultivator Jian looked at Han Li with gazes of involuntary respect. After all, one's capability defined one's status in the cultivation world. Afterwards, the party returned to their original location, where Fairy Shi was worriedly waiting for them. The group gathered together once more. After some discussion, Han Li felt that it would be best to quickly break through the formation in order to prevent any further unexpected incidents from occurring. Thus, the group once again got into formation. After refocusing his heart, Han Li placed down the formation flags and plates. The destruction of the last restriction was exceptionally smooth. After the scarlet light barrier was destroyed, the winged fiends contained within were cleanly eliminated by their water attribute magic tools. The party revealed joy, and soon turned their gazes towards the strange, exposed stone pillar at the center. With no restrictions in the way, the group was clearly able to see the stone pillar with their spiritual sense and eyesight. The stone pillar's talisman markings were extremely strange. The pillar was covered in 8 huge ancient talisman scripts that spiraled around it from top to bottom, along with countless strange stripes. In addition, the stone pillar was embedded with extremely rare yin-yang jade in an even distribution. They occasionally flashed with dim black and white lights. After looking at this for some time, they looked at each other in confusion and sunk into contemplation, bitterly attempting to recall any relatable information. Spirit Sealing Pillar. After a short moment, the weakest among them, Shidai, suddenly shouted out the name of the stone pillar in alarm. The others were stunned upon hearing this, but they soon looked at each other in bewilderment. "Fairy Shi, are you certain? Is this really a spirit sealing pillar?" Hu Yue couldn't help but ask with doubt. "Absolutely. I possess a book of ancient formation spells that particularly mentions the spirit sealing pillar. From its appearance and those talisman markings, it is exactly as was described in the book. Don't be fooled into believing it to be some common stone pillar. It was forged from over 10 extremely precious tool refinement materials. This lone pillar is worth about 6,000 spirit stones." Shidai gazed at this pillar with excitement. Chapter 422, Seven Glow Lotus. The spirit sealing pillar was actually a huge magic tool used by ancient cultivators to seal the nearby spiritual chi and isolate it from the outside the world. This rarely seen magic tool was typically used in one of two ways. One purpose was to seal extremely rare spirit medicines and spirit herbs, preventing their spiritual nature from weakening due to outside exposure. Another purpose was to suppress particularly formidable ghost spirits or devils and prevent them from escaping. Regardless of which purpose this particular spirit sealing pillar served, its value would prove to be extremely significant to Han Li and company. Spirit medicines have their obvious uses, but if the spirit sealing pillar was suppressing devils, they would prove to be optimal materials for increasing the strength of one's magic treasure by subduing and containing them within their magic treasures. However, they clearly understood that if the spirit seal pillar was used to seal a spirit or a devil, it was guaranteed to be difficult for them to subdue it after it was released. There was even a chance that it would cause backlash instead. Although everyone looked at each other with pleasant surprise, nobody brashly suggested immediately toppling the pillar to see what was underneath. After a long while of silence, Jin Qing bitterly laughed and muttered, "This is quite the conundrum, but since we've spent quite a bit of effort, nobody wishes to turn back, yes. If you want to leave, then leave. I will be staying here. Don't say that there might not be devils within. We must be ready to attempt to subdue whatever is inside." Cultivator Giant coldly spoke with his hands behind his back. Jin Qing smiled in response and turned towards Hu Yue and asked, "How about you, fellow Taoist Hu?" After muttering to himself for a moment, Hu Yue gave a resolute answer. "Fellow Taoist, you should know that because us rogue cultivators are unwilling to be restricted by others, our freedom comes at the cost of poverty. We must seize every opportunity we are given." Jin Qing didn't reveal any surprise and turned his gaze to Han Li. With a raised brow, Han Li indifferently said, "I am indifferent. If a majority wishes to see what is underneath, I will stay as well." Since he now had 72 bamboo azure cloud swords refined from gold lightning bamboo, he had nothing to fear from demons and ghosts. "Don't bother asking me. Although I am only a foundation establishment cultivator, my father fortuitously gave me a devil-repelling magic treasure. Even if I lack the strength to protect myself, no harm will come to me." Without waiting for Jin Qing to ask her, Dai took the initiative to answer after tilting her head. "All right, since everyone is unwilling to return empty-handed, let's push the pillar over. Even so, please be careful." Jin Qing lightly sighed and spoke with a cautious expression. There is no need for fellow Taoist Jin's warning, as nobody here is willing to treat their lives lightly. But still, let's get the ugly matters out of the way first. If any devils or ghosts appear, then the subduer will have the right of ownership. Fighting over them is forbidden." Cultivator Giant slowly spoke with a strange glint flashing from his eyes. "That is obvious. It is only natural to yield in accordance to skill, considering the bounty's nature." Jin Qing spoke in agreement. The others didn't have any objections. When Cultivator Giant saw this, his spirit was roused, and he revealed a trace of joy. Dai shot him a sideways glance and mysteriously smiled, asking, "Could it be that fellow Taoist has a special method to subdue devils? Is that why you're so confident?" I won't conceal this from you all. My cultivation art has a divine ability specialized in dealing with ghosts and devils. I had originally believed it wouldn't be of much use, and I didn't expect that I would be able to finally make use of it." After some slight hesitation, Cultivator Giant nodded and gave a straightforward explanation. The skulls of the wicked eccentric that Han Li had exterminated seemed to be refined from demons. It seemed that fellow Taoist Giant had quite a bit of trouble with them. Dai spoke with doubt. "It seems my poor performance has caused doubt. My divine ability requires prior preparation in order to be utilized. That wicked eccentric had caught me unprepared, and as a result, I made for a sorry sight." Cultivator Giant shook his head and explained with slight embarrassment. Dai nodded and turned her gaze back towards the spirit sealing pillar. "Since everyone is unwilling to give up, let's start. It is a bit troublesome to overthrow a spirit sealing pillar, as it can only be released after turning it several times with great force," Dai excitedly explained. When the others heard this, they narrowed their eyes. Although they were cultivators, they didn't actually possess much physical strength. Even with immense strength talismans, the group wouldn't be able to physically shift such a huge stone pillar. Han Li frowned and inwardly sent out a command. As Crooked Soul walked towards the stone pillar, he said in a deep voice, "Let me do it. I have quite a bit of strength." Hu Yue and the others revealed slight amazement. After all, Crooked Soul had yet to speak since arriving here, but now suddenly he took the initiative to solve this matter. Then we will have to trouble fellow Taoist Crooked Soul, Jade said with curiosity. Crooked Soul continued to walk towards the stone pillar as if he hadn't heard her. His body first flashed with yellow light before he placed an immense strength talisman on his body. Afterwards, he rolled up his sleeves, took a deep breath, and clasped the stone pillar in his arms. The 10-meter-tall stone pillar released a rumbling noise and started to turn bit by bit, much to the delight of the others. Crooked Soul's thick, taut arms were completely exposed and shined faintly of red light. After the stone pillar had been turned 3 times, he used all of his strength to push the pillar to the side before suddenly moving away. The stone pillar fell to the side with a series of booms, causing the ground to tremble for a moment. From the deep groove it left behind when landing, it was clear that the stone pillar was extremely heavy. However, the others didn't pay any attention to the stone pillar, and instead focused their attention on the large hole left behind from its collapse. The hole was pitch black, and from it blew a cold wind, but it also had a flight of small white stairs that led downward. "Let's go." After looking at the hole for a moment, Cultivator Jade decided to take the lead. After some hesitation, the others followed after him. Now that they've made it this far, no one was willing to turn tail. Hanli stood in his original spot, with a single hand grasping his chin with a contemplative expression, as he watched the other cultivators climb down the stairs with barely concealed excitement. He then took out the scroll painting with the sparkling red light and fiddled with it. He pondered for a moment while he looked at it before putting it away and climbing down the stairs. Crooked Soul closely followed after him. The tunnel was rather deep. After a quarter hour, Hanli finally reached the bottom. Their eyes brightened upon seeing a large hall that spanned over 70 meters appear before them. The hall's roof was embedded with fist-sized luminescent pearls, causing the hall to shine with milky white light. As the walls were sparkling with bits of light, this exceptionally beautiful sight appeared to be caused by magic techniques. In addition, there were 2 semicircle doors to the side of the hall's entrance that led to an unknown location. Hu Yue and the others stood motionlessly at the center of the hall. They were all staring in the same direction and occasionally whispered to each other as if they were studying something. Hanli walked towards them in large strides with great curiosity. "What's that?" Hanli revealed astonishment after catching sight of what they were staring at. There was a flawlessly white skeleton that was reclined at the side of a small pond. An emerald-green, foot-long arrow penetrated its skull and nailed it to the ground, appearing quite strange. But that had only caught their initial gaze. Afterwards, their focus had been excitedly drawn towards the 3-colored lotus floating at the center of the pond's surface. Although the colorful lotus had yet to bloom and was still just a bud, it was the size of a bowl and glowed with a tricolored radiance of azure, red, and yellow. But what was most inconceivable about it was the exquisite rainbow that appeared several inches above it. Its glistening light was extremely entrancing. Additionally, the pond water wasn't ordinary water. It was a dense white paste that strongly emitted a strange fragrance. "A 7-glow lotus, it has to be. I thought that this only existed in legend. That water, is it the legendary 1,000-year stone milk?" Hu Yue muttered to himself with widened eyes. No wonder there were so many formation spell restrictions placed down along with the spirit sealing pillar. With these 2 items, setting down another dozen layers of restrictions wouldn't be excessive, Jade stated while mesmerized by the colorful lotus. Jin Qing woke from his surprise and turned to look at the skeleton. He bafflingly asked, "But what about this skeleton? Could it have been the cave residence's master?" "Why does it matter? We've struck it rich. Although this 7-glow lotus only shines with 3 colors, it will still sell for an exorbitant price at auction." Cultivator Jade directly changed the subject with greed filling his eyes. Chapter 423, Extreme Poison. Hanli's calm voice sounded out from behind the other cultivators. "Is this 7-glow lotus very famous? Does it have any particular uses?" Upon hearing him, Cultivator Jade and the others sobered up and felt their hearts tremble. They unnaturally turned their gazes to Hanli. They had all witnessed the power of his gold-devouring beetles while they were fighting together, and now they feared that they wouldn't prove to be his match. Now that such a precious item had appeared, they unconsciously felt unease. Even Jin Qing, who had implored him to come here, revealed a trace of unease. Upon seeing these people's expressions, Hanli was able to roughly tell what they were thinking. A wry smile flashed through his eyes. However, he quickly concealed this and asked with an unknowing expression, "The name of this 7-glow lotus is quite peculiar. I've read through quite a few records, but I haven't the slightest idea what it is." The other cultivators looked at each other. Hu Yue let out a dry cough before giving Han Li an explanation with a smile. It seems that fellow Taoist Han has spent most of his time in secluded cultivation and rarely deals with external matters. The name of this seven-glow lotus won't be found in spirit herb records, as its name is only passed down through oral legends. It is said that it would be able to bring mortals back to life and can regrow the flesh from just bones. When cultivators take it, it is said to be able to raise one's cultivation by an entire grade. This is an immortal item from legends. Upon finishing his explanation, Hu Yue was showing inconcealable excitement despite looking at Han Li with a trace of vigilance. Han Li squinted his eyes and spoke with slight disbelief. "Is it really so miraculous? Is it even true? We have no idea, as nobody we know has seen a seven-glow lotus before. We didn't even believe such an item existed until today. However, it is certain that there are cultivators that will spend a great amount of spirit stones for it." Hu Yue spoke with a chuckle. "So it was like that." Han Li indifferently nodded his head and shifted his attention to the flawless white skeleton lying on the floor with an interested expression. Seeing that Han Li was unconcerned and didn't appear interested in monopolizing the rewards, the others let out a breath of relief. "Fellow Taoist giant, how about you go and collect the seven-glow lotus? After we auction it, let's evenly split the spirit stones. Fairy Shi will have to trouble you to look for any formation spell restrictions near the pond." Hu Yue gave a meaningful glance at Cultivator Giant and Shi Dai. After taking a thoughtful look at Han Li, they agreed. Having felt that Han Li was far too strong, they united together with a feeling of suspicion towards Han Li. After Jin Qing heard this, his face revealed a trace of hesitation as if he wanted to say something, but after some thought, he decided to stay silent. At that moment, Han Li was half-crouched next to the skeleton and was carefully examining it. Hu Yue, who was carefully gazing at him, felt somewhat relieved. After Shi Dai used a few magic tools to examine the surroundings, she confirmed, "There are no restrictions near the pond. Fellow Taoist giant may collect the lotus without obstruction." Upon hearing this, Cultivator Giant immediately stepped forward with delight. Hu Yue's expression stirred as if he had thought of something and hastily warned, "Be careful. I've heard that the seven-glow lotus can't touch any magic tools. It must be picked up by one's own hand or else it will immediately wither." Cultivator Giant responded with a wave of his hand, expressing acknowledgement. At that moment, his thoughts were completely focused on the seven-glow lotus bud. Standing beside the pond crafted from fine, beautiful jade, Cultivator Giant bowed over the water and extended his arm towards the tricolored flower bud with great caution. Shi Dai and the others watched his every move and couldn't help but hold their breaths. "Yi," he cried out in astonishment. "What happened?" Hu Yue and Shi Dai simultaneously said the same words with worried expressions. It was unknown whether they were concerned for the flower or the flower picker. Cultivator Giant withdrew his fingers and flexed them. He puzzlingly said, "It is a bit strange. This flower is rather sturdy and is very difficult to pull out. If you cannot pull the whole plant out, then how about just picking it?" Hu Yue faintly rolled his eyes and suggested. "Directly picking it off. That would greatly diminish its value." Shi Dai shook her head with a face of disapproval. "Wait, I'll try it again with an immense strength talisman." Cultivator Giant took out a yellow talisman and slapped it on his body. Afterwards, he rigidly grabbed the flower bud 3 inches beneath the surface of the water and pulled with all his strength. "Stop!" Han Li suddenly shouted while still looking down at the skeleton. Hu Yue and the others felt their hearts thump and were slightly bewildered. Cultivator Giant was startled, but seeing that he was so close to the dazzling flower bud, his heart became stubborn and he put force into his grip. However, the seven-glow lotus didn't budge in the slightest, as if it were welded in place. This set Cultivator Giant's heart aflame with impatience, and he instantly reacted by tightening his grip once more to pick off the flower. At that moment, the flower bud finally reacted and slightly trembled for a few moments before suddenly shrinking back from the water and disappearing without a trace. Plop! Cultivator Giant hadn't released his grip and was dragged into the pond when the flower stalk shrank with immense strength, resulting in a splash of milky white water. As Fairy Shi was relatively nearby, a few droplets landed on her face. She immediately let out a miserable shriek. "It's poisonous! The water is poisonous!" The female cultivator covered her face with her hands and shouted in furious alarm. She then hastily took out a red medicine bottle from her storage pouch and flustredly threw the fire-red medicine pill it contained into her mouth. In the split second between taking out the medicine pill and swallowing it, Hu Yue and Jin Qing saw her face decay with yellow blisters all over, causing their breaths to turn ice cold. Even Han Li's expression changed upon seeing this. If just a few drops caused Fairy Shi's face to become like this, then what about Cultivator Giant who fell into the water? With that thought, they turned their gazes towards the milky white pond. Ever since he had fallen into the pond, there had been no other disturbance, no miserable screams or desperate calls for help. Fear began to blossom in their hearts. At that moment, Jade finally stopped groaning and tore off a corner of her robe and tightly wound it around her face. With a light sigh, she looked at the water with a gaze of bitter resentment. Pop, pop, a series of bubbles popped on the surface of the pond. Soon after, a completely decayed corpse floated to the surface. Everyone's face had turned green. From the clothes on the corpse, it was obviously Cultivator Giant. In just a few moments, he had turned into a wet skeleton with empty eye sockets. Upon seeing that his eyes had turned into empty sockets, they felt chill down their spines. How did this happen? Was thousand-year stone milk supposed to be this poisonous? Hu Yue muttered to himself with disbelief. Thousand-year stone milk isn't poisonous, but it may as well be if poison was placed within it. Han Li stood and slowly said with a light breath. Fellow Taoist Han, could it be that your shout to stop was because you knew the water was poisonous? Jade icily asked with a slightly hoarse voice. I didn't know whether or not it was poisonous. However, I did find out that the seven-flow lotus isn't something that should be plucked. Look at the right hand of that corpse, Han Li calmly said, lightly tapping the skeleton with the tip of his foot. Hu Yue and the others attentively examined the hand and revealed baffled expressions. The bones of the right hand were partially black, and the forefinger's tip had been shattered. It was jagged, like it had been bitten off by something. Seeing that nobody was doubting him, Han Li didn't bother further explaining and looked at the water with an icy gaze. At the center of the white pond, the seven-glow lotus had re-emerged at an unknown time. It still released its beautiful glow, but now, Hu Yue and the others gazed at it as if it were a scorpion. Han Li wordlessly opened his hand with 5 fireballs floating above his fingertips. With a flick of his fingers, the fireballs lined up in the form of a word and shot towards the seven-glow lotus. Jin Qing and the others were startled, but didn't stop Han Li due to the previous occurrence. The seven-glow lotus swayed from the impact of the fireballs and suddenly withdrew from the pond. Something flew out of the water as a blur, shooting straight towards Han Li like an arrow. Chapter 424, Demon Serpent. While everyone cried out in alarm upon seeing the shadow piercing toward him, Han Li raised his hand and tossed out his green brilliance dagger he had prepared and struck the shadow. The black shadow was pushed back to the pond side and hissed with an icy gaze. Shockingly, the shadow turned out to be a meter-long, jet-black serpent with a flesh horn. A scarlet tongue hissed from its mouth, and it had a tricolored flower bud on the top half of its flesh horn. It appeared rather ridiculous, as if a small flower were growing out of its head. As for the rainbow radiance, it was a 7-colored demon chi that was formed from wisps coming out of the serpent's mouth. It appeared exactly the same as a true rainbow, so it was no surprise that it had deceived all of them. After seeing the black shadow's true appearance, Hu Yue blankly stared at it, saying, "Crested demon serpent." It transformed the crest of its head into a 7-glow lotus. After clearly seeing this serpent's true appearance, Jade's eyes coldly glinted, and she wordlessly raised her hand, releasing a purple folded scarf. This item released several explosive sounds as it shot towards the demon serpent. Careful, this serpent is extremely venomous. You aren't its match. Jin Qing abruptly said this before releasing his large, white block stamp to join the scarf as a streak of light. The demon serpent watched the 2 items attack it with an ice-cold gaze, and then opened its mouth and spouted out a bright rainbow pearl. The pearl released a gorgeous radiance that blocked the large stamp and purple scarf, forcing them to a complete stop. At that moment, Hu Yue finally woke from his disappointment at the loss of the treasure. After a moment of hesitation, he threw out 2 flying knives and entered the battle. Suddenly, 3 streaks of white light and a streak of purple brilliance were intertwined with the rainbow light. The serpent was completely fearless. After a few strange croaks, it spouted out several colorful clouds. The clouds made the magic treasures dim until they were nearly dark immediately after they made contact. How can this fiend be so powerful? Could it be a mutated demon? Jin Qing was aghast at the sight. But as soon as he finished talking, a red radiance was fiercely shot out, piercing through the colorful cloud in an instant and striking the demon serpent's flesh horn. A thumb-sized bloody hole was left behind by the strike. The demon released a strange shout and painfully slammed into the limestone floor. Soon after, its body coiled, and it shot towards the pond in a blur. But at that moment, a group of emerald flying swords flew down from above, nailing the serpent's head to the limestone floor faster than lightning. The serpent then flusteredly thrashed around but wasn't able to move away in the slightest. This was the result of the sudden actions by Han Li and Crooked Soul. In addition to Crooked Soul's use of a blood spirit drill, Han Li used the bamboo cloudswarm swords to hold it down. He had made sure to restrain his swords, divine Devilbane lightning, to prevent the others from realizing that his swords had been refined from heaven lightning bamboo. Jin Qing and the others felt relief when they saw Han Li had successfully restrained the demon serpent. After some slight discussion, Dai and the others decided to put away their magic treasures once they were released by the rainbow demon pearl's pressure. Afterwards, the party gathered around the demon serpent. This really is a crested demon serpent, but it appears that someone grafted a seven-glow lotus likeness on it. It absolutely doesn't have the capability to do such a thing innately. Hu Yue revealed a puzzled expression as he watched the demon serpent struggling to free itself from the small swords. Obviously, this seven-glow lotus was some kind of ingenious trap. It is entirely possible that dead fellow over there had fallen for it, even we fell for it. Jin Qing agreed with a bitter smile. Han Li silently stood at the side as he examined the demon serpent before turning his gaze back to the right hand of the skeleton. He couldn't help but imagine someone excitedly attempting to pick the seven-glow lotus, as the demon serpent then flew out of the water and bit off his finger. Soon after, he was torn apart by the poison. Han Li felt his heart coldly tremble as turned to look at the small arrow in the skeleton's head. It had clearly been placed by someone who came later. Whoever set this trap was truly quite the schemer. Slice. The crested demon serpent's head was separated from its body with a cold flash of light. Dai coldly glanced at it from the side with a dagger in her hand. Han Li slightly frowned. Han Li knew that she detested this serpent because it had ruined her face. It was said that a woman's appearance was just as precious as her own life. Even if the crested demon serpent wasn't the main culprit behind her ruined face, it was definitely one of the main causes. Han Li lightly shook his head and raised his hand, returning his small swords back into his body. Afterwards, his gaze fell back down to the arrow in the skeleton. This arrow appeared to be the same emerald green as Han Li's own bamboo cloudswarm swords at first glance, but further inspection proved otherwise. Han Li's flying swords were bright and shining, while the arrow faintly carried a dark qi, as if it had been tainted or refined with evil arts. Fellow Taoist Han, will we go and explore any other areas? Perhaps we will discover something. Having seen Han Li continue to study the skeleton, Hu Yue couldn't help but ask this. It seemed he truly didn't want to go back empty-handed. Please don't hesitate to continue exploring Crooked Soul, and I will remain in the main hall, Han Li said with a calm expression. Hu Yue revealed slight surprise. After looking at the bones along with the emerald green arrow, he revealed slight hesitation and ultimately didn't move. When Jin Qing and Dai saw this, they also silently stayed in the main hall. After all, who knows what other dangers lay in wait in the cave residence, given the initial encounter. It was obviously safer to stay together. Furthermore, they were able to guess that the arrow was unordinary. Why else would the mysterious Han Li continue to unceasingly examine it? Fellow Taoist Han, would you say that rather than being an ancient cultivator ruin, this place was actually an elaborate trap? Jin Qing suddenly asked in a low voice. Impossible, this place is definitely an ancient cultivator ruin. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too much of a coincidence that you found this place from the pearls? However, this place had already been discovered by someone else, and they had long placed down traps inside. Han Li shook his head. If what you say is true, then are there no treasures left here? Dai spoke with an icy voice. Han Li revealed an expression of slight regret, but remained silent in tacit approval. Jin Qing and Hu Yue then looked at each other with changed expressions. Hu Yue's face was more notable between the two. Not only did this trip end with no benefits, but of the two that he had invited, one had met an untimely end while the other had their face ruined. This treasure hunt ended up being a complete disaster. During their moment of absolute silence, the pond released a faint groan. The cultivators hurriedly turned their gaze towards the pond in alarm. Cultivator Giant's body, who should have already been dead for quite some time, slowly climbed out of the pond and let out an occasional groan from his skeleton mouth. At that moment, the cultivators were dumbstruck and were looking at each other in dismay. Since they were cultivators, it wasn't particularly frightening for a malicious spirit or other evil entity to appear. They could just make short work of them. However, this was the body of a companion that had entered the cave with them not long ago. Could it be that he had a secret technique that allowed his primal soul to persist after his body was destroyed? As it was unclear whether the corpse was currently possessed by its owner or a ghost, Hu Yue and the others were hesitant to act. The corpse of Cultivator Giant still continued to slowly climb out of the pond and approach them. Hu Yue saw that something was amiss and hastily yelled, "Regardless of whether you are man or ghost, don't come any closer or else our hands will be forced." He flung out his sleeves, throwing his flying daggers out to revolve around its body. Jin Qing and Shidai were also vigilant and rigidly stared at the corpse. Just as Hu Yue finished speaking, Cultivator Giant's body stopped and remained motionless. Hu Yue and the others involuntarily let out a sigh of relief in response. But as Han Li detachedly watched on, he felt that something was very wrong and instinctively took out an item with a flip of his hand. In the very next moment, a sudden and abrupt change occurred. Cultivator Giant's body suddenly kicked off the ground and fiercely pounced towards the group. Hu Yue and Jin Qing's expressions paled, and they instantly released their magic treasures. The two streaks of white radiance and the streak of white light struck Cultivator Giant and cleanly destroyed the skeleton with a single blow. But suddenly, Hu Yue felt a light wind gently blowing past him. With a chill running down his back, he turned his head to see a skeleton hand emerging from his abdomen, tightly grasping a bean-sized, sparkling blue core in its fingers. Chapter 425, Congealed Yang Birds. Eyes wide in disbelief, Hu Yue stared at the skeletal hand protruding from his abdomen. With an audible crack, the blue core was crushed into a fine powder, which trickled from the hand. Hu Yue let out a muffled groan and weakly fell to the floor after the skeletal hand withdrew from his body. The hole left behind bled profusely, quickly filling the hall with a bloody stench. Although he was somehow still alive for the time being, he was clearly on death's door. The sound of Jin Qing's and Shidai's cries of alarm along with the sound of his magic treasure shattering rang in Hu Yue's mind as all of his life experiences flashed through his mind. His impoverished life during childhood and the joy his entire family revealed upon discovering his spiritual roots. The moment of helplessness he felt when the senior martial sister he admired married someone else. His ecstasy at successful core formation, and his wholehearted grand ambition of one day forming a nascent soul. As all these memories flowed through his mind, his limbs gradually grew colder and more distant. But he was not resigned to dying. He had refined a set of 3 flying daggers as his magic treasure. Ordinarily, he would only attack with 2 of them and would leave the third behind in his body. This was because the third flying dagger had been refined using a secret technique. Although its attack power was average, it could automatically protect his body with far greater awareness than common magic techniques. Moreover, he had spared no cost or effort when refining this treasure, and it had just recently entered the sentient stage. Even if he didn't give a command, the treasure should have responded to the killing intent and automatically protected his body against the surprise attack. Unless the attacker, Hu Yue finally thought of something, using the last of his mortal strength to turn his head with slight reluctance and view everything that was happening behind him. At that moment, a white blur was closely chasing after Jin Qing. Jin Qing continuously evaded it while engulfed by a silver radiance. He had released his own magic treasure and was ceaselessly bombarding the white blur with attacks as if he were greatly fearful of it. As for Han Li and the others, they were trapped within a large expanse of black qi. The fiery scroll painting in hand, Han Li shot countless fist-sized flames from it, creating a huge ring of fire around them that continuously attacked the black qi, keeping it at bay. Shidai and Crooked Soul closely stood behind Han Li. Crooked Soul's body was enveloped in blood light, and he continuously released purple flames from his hands, striking any black qi that leaked past the ring of fire. At his side, Shidai was grasping a white bead that radiated with light, preventing any of the black qi that slipped past both abilities from approaching. Even then, she still revealed an expression of fear. Hu Yue didn't pay any attention to the black qi, and strenuously examined the white blur chasing after Jin Qing. Sure enough, the white skeleton of the long-dead cultivator was now surrounded in white fog and was pursuing Jin Qing with great speed. At this point, it couldn't possibly be considered dead in the least. Hu Yue smiled sadly. He, a core formation cultivator, had met his end by a skeleton. What a ridiculous affair. While Hu Yue was still mocking himself, he faded into eternal rest with a derisive smirk still at the corner of his mouth. As Hu Yue breathed his last, Han Li continuously surveyed the situation with a sullen expression. During the same moment that Hu Yue had fallen prey to the white skeleton, the nearby walls had suddenly released a wide expanse of cold yin ghost fog, trapping them all at once. Fortunately, Han Li had made slight preparations and had opened the painting scroll without hesitation, releasing countless flaming spirit birds from within. These demon fire-enveloped swallows were congealed yang birds. Han Li had previously read a detailed introduction of them in an ancient record. They were born from fire essence and particularly loved to consume yin ghosts and malicious souls, earning a reputation of being the bane of yin. However, this bird had long been extinct, and the scroll painting had only sealed a fraction of the spirit bird's soul. As a result, it could only release avatars of the congealed yang birds. While these avatars appeared exactly the same as actual congealed yang birds, their strength was incomparable to the original. Else, this black ghost fog would have been cleanly devoured rather than just being temporarily scattered. Although Han Li was completely tangled up by this ghost fog, he wasn't particularly worried. Both his bamboo cloudswarm swords and his gold-devouring beetles could easily make short work of it. What made him uneasy was the ghost mist's master, who still had yet to reveal himself. As for the skeleton, it was clear at a glance that it wasn't intelligent in the least. It was being controlled by someone else. However, the skeleton was quite strange. Since it was completely unscathed from the repeated pummeling of Jin Qing's magic treasure, there must be some mystery behind it. As Han Li thought this, ghostly wails suddenly broke out from around him. This blood-chilling voice was deafeningly sharp and belonged to neither man nor woman. Those who heard it would have their minds bewildered and both their blood and qi in disarray. Han Li's heart trembled, and he reflexively spread out his spiritual sense to envelope the entire hall. At that same moment, he flicked his finger and sent out two small emerald swords from his body, which began to slowly revolve around him. Upon hearing the ghostly wail, Jin Qing appeared distraught from fear and furiously exclaimed, "What demon wishes to mystify himself and remains hidden?" Although his voice wasn't loud, it resonated throughout the room. Unexpectedly, the ghostly wails stopped in response. In addition, the next strike of his magic treasure completely shattered the skeleton. Jin Qing was pleasantly surprised by the strange turn of events. At that same time, the ghost mist closely surrounding Han Li, and company quickly withdrew back into the walls around them. Han Li was greatly surprised. He didn't believe that Jin Qing's furious roar had contained such power. In the very next moment, Jade turned around and took this opportunity to madly rush towards the stairs. In the blink of an eye, she was already climbing up to the surface. Han Li was expressionless upon seeing this, but Jin Qing was brimming with fury. This woman would flee in the middle of battle. Although her magic power was lacking, the magic treasure pearl in her possession was clearly capable of restraining the ghost mist. Naturally, he couldn't just let her run off. With that thought in mind, Jin Qing instantly opened his mouth to stop her. But at that moment, another anomaly occurred. Just as Jade reached the second step, the stone wall next to her suddenly flashed with green light. A terrifying, 10-fingered ghost claw rushed out without warning and pierced through her abdomen at a speed that almost couldn't be seen. Jade wretchedly screamed and did her utmost to brighten the pearl's light in an attempt to escape. However, the ghost hand didn't fear the pearl in the slightest and emitted a black qi instead, surrounding Jade with it in a mere moment. The woman's screams came to an abrupt stop. Once the black qi withdrew, all that was left was a dried-up corpse that was then thrown before Han Li and Crooked Soul. After Han Li turned his head to look at the fleshless corpse, his face turned slightly green. Jin Qing's face had long turned pale, but he was now nervously glancing around with his white block stamp magic treasure in hand. I need one more suitable corpse. Which of you three will sacrifice yourself as tribute?" An icy voice echoed throughout the hall with a tone of disdain. Han Li's eyes coldly glinted, and he spread out the scroll painting once more. With the entire nest of fire birds returned to the scroll painting, Han Li formed a dual-handed incantation gesture with a solemn expression. Whoosh! A 3-meter-wide congealed yang bird flew out of the scroll painting while surrounded in brilliant flames. After flying once around Han Li's head, it shot towards one of the hall's stone pillars with wings spread wide. Bang! When the huge bird rammed into the stone pillar, it flashed with green light, and an eerie snake made from black chi flew out and tangled with the fire bird. With the bird spouting out broiling white essence fire, and the eerie snake spraying ink-black cold chi, a huge battle unfolded between them in the hall. I didn't expect there to be someone capable of utilizing the long-extinct spirit-controlling techniques. It seems I've underestimated you. After this was said, a freakish shadow slowly walked out of the stone pillar. Han Li and Jin Qing both gazed at it with rapt attention. Not only was the silhouette dark green, but it was also surrounded in sparkling green light, masking its true appearance. His body appeared to be wrapped with arm-thick bands of black fog, and his eyes were as scarlet as fresh blood. After the freakish shadow swept his gaze past the three, Han Li and Jin Qing felt a chill run down their backs as if their minds and hearts had been laid bare. They couldn't help but glance at each other before looking back at the shadow with horror. The enemy had used only his gaze to exert such great pressure onto them. This clearly showed that this person's cultivation far exceeded their own. Could this person be a nascent soul cultivator? From the appearance of this freakish shadow, it seemed to resemble a ghost or demon more than a living person. But if it really were a malicious spirit, then how had it preserved the entirety of its intelligence? Chapter 426, Treachery. Jin Qing suppressed his fear and forced himself to ask, "Is your esteemed self man or ghost?" The freakish shadow sinisterly smiled and teased, "Man, ghost, you tell me." Jin Qing's expression became extremely unsightly. Han Li remained silent and quickly opened his scroll painting without warning. Countless firebirds rushed out, flocking straight towards the freakish shadow. At the same moment, the previously summoned huge bird released a sharp cry and abandoned its fight with the eerie snake, shooting straight towards the freakish shadow as a scorching ball of white flame. The freakish shadow snorted disdainfully and said, "Congealed yang birds. If they had their genuine bodies, this senior might be slightly fearful. But to dare attempt to devour ghosts and exterminate devils with only their remnant souls." Having said that, the green shadow raised its hands and condensed black chi around them in an instant. Pooh! The black chi transformed into 2 horned ink pythons which shot towards the large flock of firebirds. With their bloodthirsty mouths wide open, each python swallowed several firebirds. Immediately after, they each burped a wisp of white smoke and were completely unharmed. At that moment, the huge congealed yang bird that had turned into a ball of white flame arrived in front of the snakes. However, it completely ignored them and shot straight towards the freakish shadow. When the shadow saw this, its eyes flashed with red light, enriching their color. Although the shadow didn't move, it faintly revealed a solemn expression. It was clear that the remnant souls of the congealed yang bird wasn't nearly as harmless as it had made them out to be. Peng! The green shadow's hands trembled, separating the horned pythons from its hands and allowing them to move on their own. Then, while clenching its hands as hard as it could, otherworldly dark green flames flourished from its grasp. Soon after, its body blurred and met the white fire sphere with a fierce punch. As Han Li and Jin Qing watched on with shock, the white ball of flame was scattered by the strike and disappeared in an instant. A white crystal pearl suddenly appeared in the green shadow's grasp. The shadow evilly grinned and swallowed it without hesitation, before turning its ice-cold gaze back to Han Li once more. At that moment, the scroll painting in Han Li's grasp set itself aflame, and he hurriedly tossed it away. It turned into ash in the blink of an eye. Once the scroll painting turned to ash, the fire birds that were still tangling with the ink snakes disappeared as well. Han Li sucked in a deep breath. Although he knew that the remnant souls of the congealed yang birds weren't the green shadow's match, he didn't anticipate that a treasure that specialized in subduing yin ghosts would be blown away with a single blow. He had only sent them out to probe the opponent's strength, and ended up not acquiring the slightest detail. The only thing he was certain of was that the opponent wasn't a mere ghost or demon. Remaining calm, Han Li attentively gazed at the green shadow and inwardly assessed how great his odds of victory were if they were to fight. "Not bad, I'm now very interested in your body. As for you two, get lost." The green shadow slowly spoke while looking at Han Li. It seemed his last attack had provoked it. Naturally, Crooked Soul didn't move in the slightest, But when Jin Qing heard this, he grew distracted, and his expression incessantly changed. Although he hadn't personally engaged it yet, his opponent's strength was deep and immeasurable. Even if he were to join hands with Han Li, Jin Qing reckoned that their odds of victory weren't very high. Now that the freakish shadow told him to leave, Jin Qing's heart was wavering. Having personally witnessed so many cultivators meet their tragic end on this very day, Jin Qing, who normally bragged about being guilt-free and clear-hearted, felt for the first time a desire to cherish life and live another day. The green shadow snorted and swept its gaze past Jin Qing and Crooked Soul. It sinisterly said, "What? I give you two a chance for survival, and you two do not wish to take it. This senior should have just saved himself the trouble and turned you two into corpses from the start." Having heard the freakish shadow's words brimming with killing intent, Jin Qing's face changed between red and white several times before eventually cupping his fist to Han Li and shamefully saying, "Brother Han, I do not wish to die here. I will have to let you down." Afterwards, he said no more and rushed toward the stone steps without looking back. Han Li's expression was calm and didn't reveal any emotions of anger or disappointment. He merely gazed at Jin Qing as he departed with a faint, cold glare. The green shadow's red eyes revealed a trace of satisfaction. Just as Jin Qing rushed past the shattered skeleton, an alarming change occurred. The nearby fragments of the skeleton suddenly launched towards him like a barrage of arrows. With furious alarm, Jin Qing surrounded himself in a layer of silver light in a flash. But without waiting for him to release his magic treasure or question the freakish shadow, the bone shards shined with white radiance and shot through his silver barrier as if it weren't even there. An instant later, Jin Qing's body was utterly shredded and fell to the floor without uttering a single word. Han Li expressionlessly looked at the corpse on the floor and lightly shook his head. With a flip of his hand, a spirit beast pouch appeared in his hand. Simultaneously, his two flying swords in front of him trembled and faintly released a green radiance. "Interesting. How come you aren't asking me why I didn't keep my promise?" the green shadow asked with a sneer. "If your esteemed self doesn't wish to talk, then there is no need to take the initiative to ask. I'd just be wasting my breath," Han Li expressionlessly said. "Not bad. Youngster, you're quite to my liking. If this were before I met Great Catastrophe, I might have taken you in as my disciple. But now, I will never take another disciple. I will be repaying my treacherous disciples by turning their bones to ash and refining their souls." The green shadow was slightly surprised at Han Li's response, but soon its voice once again grew icy. Without a change of expression, Han Li waved his arm. Crooked Soul then walked to Han Li's side with his body enveloped in blood light. He didn't plan on spouting rubbish, instead preparing to use a thunderous strike to defeat the enemy in a single blow. At the same time, additional blades of his bamboo cloudswarm swords from within his body readied themselves to pounce with fervor. After seeing Crooked Soul's bloodlight, the shadow slightly trembled and it smiled in great anger. "Divine bloodlight. Good, good. Are you disciples of Zenith Yin or Zenith Brilliance?" Han Li slightly frowned. "Zenith Yin? Could you talking about Grandmaster Zenith Yin of Zenith Yin Island?" Han Li indifferently asked. He faintly felt as if he could unravel the mystery behind the Black Fiend School and Zenith Yin Island. Upon hearing Han Li, the green shadow flew into a rage and loudly shouted, "Grandmaster Zenith Yin! Could it be that traitorous disciple dares to call himself Grandmaster?" Han Li was slightly stunned. This ghost was actually the master of Grandmaster Zenith Yin. How truly bizarre. Just as Han Li was left flabbergasted by those words, a green light flashed from his body, and a muffled noise came from behind him. Han Li couldn't help but turn around with alarm. However, there was absolutely nothing behind him. Not good. In nearly an instant, Han Li understood that he had been tricked and hastily turned his head back, instinctively releasing 7 flying swords to protect him. As of current, controlling 9 of his bamboo cloudswarm swords was Han Li's absolute limit. During the instant he turned his head over, his 9 flying swords released a single streak of swordlight. A faint golden arc of divine devilbane lightning struck from the swordlight, rendering the incoming green ball of light non-existent. Han Li was drenched in cold sweat, as he had nearly just fallen to the enemy. "Gold lightning bamboo, you refined your flying swords from gold lightning bamboo." At that moment the green shadow spoke with incredulousness. Han Li sneered and thought to mock the shadow, but he suddenly felt a strange fluctuation from up above him. He leaned to the side out of reflex, but he still felt his chest tremble, An extremely familiar red radiance had pierced through him with chilling cold, creating a wound that bled profusely. Immediately after, a yellow streak of light fiercely struck at him. Dang, a clear ring sounded out. Several of his flying swords flew out to block the yellow streak, the immemorial bowl. Crooked Soul, Hanley shouted to his side in furious alarm. The blood spirit drill and the fierce attack from the immemorial bowl were clearly Crooked Soul's doing. However, the figure at his side blurred, shooting towards the green shadow as if he hadn't heard him. Hanley reached out for the connection in his mind. Although his spiritual sense was still present in Crooked Soul, for some unknown reason he had completely lost control of him. The green shadow howled with laughter and flew towards Crooked Soul as a streak of green light. Hanley's face grew extremely pale. Then with clenched teeth, he suddenly formed an incantation gesture and fiercely uttered, "Receive." From a distance, a small green ball flew from the crown of Crooked Soul's head and hastily shot into Hanley's body before disappearing without a trace. At that moment, the green shadow had already entered Crooked Soul. As Hanley pushed down on the wound in his chest, he was fiercely staring at Crooked Soul. Crooked Soul then slowly opened his eyes to reveal a pair of glowing blood-scarlet eyes. Chapter 427, Profound Soul Demonification. Hanley quickly took out a blue talisman from his storage pouch and gently slapped it onto his wound. With a flash of white light, the bleeding immediately stopped. But when he turned his head back to meet Crooked Soul's icy gaze, Hanley wordlessly emitted an azure light around his body, which reached 10 meters in height, and had his emerald swords revolve around him in streaks. It all appeared blindingly bright. Hanley had already made a firm resolution that if he were going to leave this place, he needed to have these bamboo cloudswarm swords outside his body to protect against any tricks this ancient eccentric may have in store. To tell the truth, this was the most fearsome, menacing enemy he had encountered since entering the cultivation world. If his reactions were the slightest bit slow, he would have already had a hole through his heart. Were his spiritual sense not stronger and his mind not nimbler than a common cultivator's, he would have undoubtedly met certain death from Crooked Soul's recent ambush. The blood spirit drill was truly vicious and sinister. It could hardly be blocked. But now, Hanley didn't have to worry about any further attacks from the blood spirit drill. That last attack was the last charge that Crooked Soul had cultivated. However, Hanley still felt incredibly gloomy. According to the external incarnation technique, he clearly should have refined his spiritual sense fragment and Crooked Soul's physical body into one. Just how had this old ghost been able to take control of Crooked Soul without his knowledge? He wasn't even given the slightest warning. Were if not for his quick wits in hastily retrieving his divided consciousness from Crooked Soul, he feared the shadow would have already used it as a method for consuming him. Hanley now found himself in a truly troublesome situation. Since the enemy had possessed Crooked Soul, then the green shadow must be deceased and was closer to an evil demonic spirit or primal soul. The shadow possessing Crooked Soul wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and it may have quite possibly given Hanley the opportunity to exterminate him. With that thought, Hanley flipped his hand, and an exquisitely crafted small brass bell appeared in his hand, the spirit-guiding bell he had kept stored away for so long. This bell contained the blood essence of Crooked Soul's physical body. Although he couldn't count on it to arrest the enemy, it could still be used to create an advantageous opportunity. At that moment, Crooked Soul was stretching and moving his body as if wanting to familiarize himself with it. Having seen Hanley's action, he eerily chuckled as if the result of the coming battle were laid in stone. Hanley's expression darkened, and he no longer hesitated to ring the small bell. With a series of clear bell rings, Crooked Soul's red eyes flickered, but no other change occurred from his body as if nothing was wrong. Hanley's heart sunk. Regardless of what tricks you perform on this fiend core avatar, since I've become the master of this body, do you believe that minor restriction will have an effect on me? Crooked Soul's rough voice slowly spoke with a mocking tone. You know that it is a fiend core avatar. Hanley's heart stirred with surprise. The fiend core and external incarnation technique were something I had originally passed down to my two traitorous disciples. Did you believe I wouldn't see through them? You sure are courageous to use them in front of me. Could it be that your master didn't warn you that so long as this secret technique was used to refine an avatar, that I would be able to easily control it? Crooked Soul twisted his neck left and right and indifferently said with crossed arms. Hanley was bewildered, but his face wore a strange expression. What master? The avatar creation technique was something I acquired from a Jade talisman. Could it have some relation to you? Han Li asked, unwilling to be a scapegoat for Grandmaster Zenith Yin. Regardless of whether his words were true or false, Han Li still gave a dull explanation. Jade slipped. Youngster, did you believe that by not admitting to be the apprentice of my two traitorous disciples that I would let you go? After I capture you, I will refine your soul and acquire everything that I want to know. Crooked Soul didn't seem to believe Han Li and spoke expressionlessly. With that said, he beckoned to the skeleton pile nearby without further hesitation, causing it to float in the air. In an instant, it reassembled into a complete skeleton and flew towards Crooked Soul with a flash of white light. Although Han Li didn't know what he intended, he wasn't going to allow his opponent to smoothly succeed. He immediately flicked his finger 3 times, shooting out 3 streaks of azure swordlight from his hand. The azure essence sword streaks shot straight towards the skeleton. You dare to so presumptuously release those granules of light, Crooked Soul sinisterly said. He then opened his mouth and spouted out a beam of blood light. With a series of explosions, the blood light and the azure light struck and scattered into radiance. Han Li frowned and wore a solemn expression. After being possessed, Crooked Soul's cultivation was no longer restricted to early core formation stage. How truly odd. But what happened next left Han Li even more aghast. Once the white skeleton flew in front of Crooked Soul, it merged into his body without the slightest obstruction. Crooked Soul then loudly roared with his head facing upwards. His body emitted several different flashes of colors, from dark green otherworldly flame, pitch black ghost mist, and Crooked Soul's divine blood light. These 3 distinct radiances tangled with one another, continuously wandering throughout Crooked Soul's body and fully covering him within it. As Crooked Soul roared, a small explosion could be heard from within his body. With his body bowed in pain, his limbs and body began to slowly shrink. Once this was done, he stood up appearing much shorter, exactly like an ordinary person. But what caused Han Li to be most shocked was Crooked Soul's face had changed to that of a youth with delicate facial features. Even the flourishing blood red in his eyes had greatly dimmed. In that instant, Crooked Soul had undergone a transformation into a completely different person. Han Li was stupefied for a moment before revealing a bitter smile. Han Li originally wished to use this opportunity to strike his opponent given how audaciously he used magic in front of him. But he didn't expect that this technique would be performed so quickly that there wasn't an opportunity to make use of. After a moment of silence, Han Li dryly asked the youth a bizarre question: is this possession, or complete body seizure? The delicate youth mysteriously smiled and glanced at Han Li with narrowed eyes, serenely saying, "You greatly underestimate my profound soul demonification technique. It is a secret art that only a nascent soul cultivator is capable of performing. So long as it is cultivated, there are no restrictions with body seizure, and profound souls may be added to another body as one wishes. Now that my profound soul has solidified its bones, I will have you be a blood sacrifice so that this divine ancestor may rise once again." He raised his hands, suddenly turning his fingers into incisive claws with dark green fingernails several inches long. Han Li's expression darkened, and he didn't further waste his breath. He tossed out the spirit beast pouch that he had been holding since the beginning and released his several thousands of gold-devouring beetles. A short moment later, a glowing cloud of gold and silver floated above his head. Then with a wave of his arms, white lights continuously flickered around him, surrounding Han Li with 40 huge ape puppets. Each of them stared at the youth with an icy gaze. But Han Li didn't stop there. With his 2 hands forming an incantation seal, his 9 small swords flew out as azure light and converged into a 3-meter-long emerald sword. The sword streak endlessly twinkled with faint golden arcs of light continuously sparking from it. Upon seeing this, the delicate youth's expression greatly changed, revealing surprise and a grave expression. After the youth's gaze flickered several times, he suddenly said, "Flying swords refined from heaven lightning bamboo, insect control techniques, and puppets. It seems you really aren't the disciple of Zenith Yin and Zenith Brilliance. Since this is the case, then how about we have a proper chat?" Han Li, who had just prepared his entire offensive, was stunned upon hearing this. But after a moment of silence, he coldly said, "Unfortunately, I really want to test whether or not your esteemed self is capable of receiving my flying swords." Without the slightest hesitation, Han Li pointed towards his huge flying sword, and it immediately launched towards the youth in a green streak of light as thick as a python. As it flew, it occasionally rolled with sounds of thunder. The youth's face slightly sank upon seeing this, and he lightly waved his claws in front of him. 5 crescents of black radiance appeared out of the air and rapidly expanded, blurring several times before quickly chopping towards the green sword streak. Upon contact, the green sword streak sparked with faint golden arcs of lightning, completely obliterating the crescents of black radiance. They weren't able to withstand even a single blow. Although the youth's expression remained calm, his mind was greatly startled. The power of the gold lightning bamboo was far greater than he had anticipated. In the blink of an eye, the green sword streak had arrived in front of the youth. However, he was still calm and collected as he indifferently watched the huge sword approach him, as if he still had something up his sleeve. Chapter 428, Xianxia. The youth swiped his ghost claw again, but this time with a flash of green radiance, shooting a green streak of light towards the incoming sword streak. It immediately resulted in a huge clap of thunder. Black and golden arcs of lightning bursted out, intertwining to eventually form a huge sphere of lightning. With neither attack giving way, their cries of thunder reverberated through the hall with astonishing pressure. Han Li suddenly narrowed his gaze. Heaven lightning bamboo. He was alarmed to find the opponent also possessed a magic treasure refined from heaven lightning bamboo. Could it be? Han Li thought of something and attentively examined the green streak that the youth released. At the brilliant center of the arcs of lightning, he saw a foot-long emerald arrow struggling fiercely against his huge sword made from combining 9 bamboo cloudswarm swords. The lightning it shot out was much different than that of his sword. Instead of a golden color, it was instead mixed with a deep black as if it had been refined by an evil technique. Although this was the case, the black lightning was exceedingly powerful and even took the upper hand in its clash against the gold lightning. Han Li couldn't help but let out a gloomy sigh. He didn't expect that his original doubts were accurate. He had felt a familiar aura upon seeing the arrow embedded in the skeleton's skull. It was quite similar to his own gold lightning bamboo, but it occasionally released a faint, black evil chi, arousing his doubts. After all, according to what he knew, the gold lightning bamboo had only appeared once in the scattered star seas, but it soon disappeared after an unknown number of years. How would chance have it that he would end up encountering it? He had found it incredulous. But now, not only was this misleading arrow refined from gold lightning bamboo, but it was also a magic treasure that was refined by the old ghost. What an amazing farce. Han Li couldn't help but reveal a faint, sarcastic smile. But he suddenly recalled something. Had the old ghost taken advantage of when he was examining the skeleton and controlled the arrow, he would have certainly died. With that in mind, he couldn't help but feel increasingly fearful. His back was covered in cold sweat from that lingering fear. It wasn't exactly a surprise that his bamboo cloudswarm swords couldn't beat the arrow. He had tempered his flying swords for far too little time, and he was only capable of relying on the innate ability of the gold lightning bamboo in a fight. It was only natural for it to be inferior to the enemy's magic treasure. Had his 9 flying swords been tempered for a slightly longer time, the enemy's trifling single magic treasure wouldn't be able to contend with it, regardless of whether or not it had also been refined from gold lightning bamboo. But now that he found out that the opponent had a method of restraining the divine devilbane lightning of his flying swords, Han Li was unwilling to launch a full-scale attack. After all, the Green Shadow's true cultivation had not been clearly shown from the very start, even after he had transformed into a youth. In addition, given his adversary's cunning and resourcefulness, his opponent's evil magics and devilish arts would surely be even more weird and troublesome. He doubted if he could do much to stop them. If he were to put his all into the fight, even by giving his 100,000 gold devouring swarm the kill command, his victory still wouldn't be certain. It could be assumed that, since the enemy had suddenly put forward a proposal a moment ago, that he was also somewhat fearful of Han Li's own magic treasure and strange techniques. With that thought in mind, Han Li wordlessly beckoned toward his huge sword. With a huge explosion, the huge sword dissolved into the original 9 swords and shot back towards Han Li. When the youth saw this, a cold glint flashed through his eyes. Then, after some hesitation, he decided to not continue his attack and recalled his magic treasures. After Han Li recalled his flying swords, he indifferently asked as if uncertain, "If your esteemed self truly is Grandmaster Zenith Yin's master, then you must be over 1,000 years old." Youth lowered his head to look at his restored hands and indifferently said, "Before I cultivated the profound soul demonification technique, I was over 600 years old. Although I don't know exactly how much time has passed after I transformed my body into a profound soul, it should be no less than 400 years. Fortunately, I cultivated this profound soul body after scattering my nascent soul. Had I remained in my flesh body, I fear I would have long died in meditation. And Li remained silent. If what he said was true, this person was a 1,000-year ghost. And Li couldn't help but be interested in this profound soul demonification technique, which allowed one to break through the limitations of one's lifespan. As such, Han Li slowly said, "Since you say this, then I must truly address you as senior." When the youth heard this, he glimpsed at Han Li and found that Han Li's words were not to his liking. He sneered and said, "Senior, after so many years of being cursed and lauded in the cultivation world, I didn't expect to remain as a bodiless ghost and renounce my opportunity to enter the cycle of reincarnation, all in order to take revenge on my two traitorous disciples. If you do not clearly explain your origins, then I will greatly damage my own origin chi to ensure you do not leave here alive." Although his voice was exceptionally calm, his words were heavy and chilling, leaving no room for doubt. Han Li bitterly smiled. After some doubt, he said, "Wouldn't it be too much of a loss for this junior if only senior got to ask the questions? Could senior also clear up a few of this one's doubts?" The youth was stunned for a moment before roaring with laughter. "Good, very good, I can agree to these conditions, but if you know too much, your life will be difficult to preserve." The youth made a grand display of arrogance. Senior doesn't need to worry about that. If this one hasn't guessed incorrectly, then senior's cultivation should be at late core formation at most. I'm honestly curious about whether or not I could endure." Han Li asked a probing question while carefully examining the youth's expression. The youth coldly laughed several times, but he didn't reveal the slightest peculiarity, causing Han Li to inwardly curse. "Sly old bastard. Let's cut the rubbish. You said that you learned everything from a Jade slip but not my two traitorous disciples. Give it to me." The youth's voice was harsh and cold, carrying an overbearing tone. Han Li frowned. After some hesitation, he patted his storage pouch and flung a Jade slip emitting gray chi towards the youth. The youth didn't directly catch the Jade slip. Instead, he raised his hand, summoning a black python of black chi to catch it in its mouth and bring it before him. Without moving his limbs, his eyes flashed with blood-red radiance, and he emotionlessly gazed into the Jade slip. A short moment later, he withdrew his peculiar gaze and lightly flicked his finger, shooting the Jade slip back to Han Li with a whoosh. He then slowly said to Han Li, "Tell me where you received this object. The Jade slip doesn't contain enough to disprove a relationship between you and my two traitorous disciples." Han Li faintly smiled and didn't answer, asking his own question instead. Since senior's divine abilities are so great, then surely his reputation must have been equally great. Could senior bestow his grand name to me? When Han Li avoided answering his question and asked his own, the youth was initially furious and his appearance grew fierce. But soon after he thought of something and coldly replied, "You should have heard of me before. The Bone Sage, Xianxia." The Bone Sage. Han Li couldn't recall having heard that name. However, he didn't pay this any mind and calmly said, "Since senior believes this Jade slip is insufficient to prove my identity, then my cultivation art should be enough. Senior should have seen that my cultivation art is completely different than what he passed down. Please take another look." Having said that, Han Li flourished his azure essence sword arts to its greatest extent and emitted a blinding azure light from his body. Soon after, Han Li flicked his fingers and shot out 8 azure essence sword streaks towards the walls, resulting in several bowl-thick holes. As for the origin of the Jade slip, it is quite simple. Junior exterminated an evil cultivator and unexpectedly acquired it from his body. If senior doesn't believe this, then there is nothing else to say. We can only fight. Han Li lightly patted his hands and spoke mildly. Xianxia stared at Han Li's azure light with an extremely gloomy expression. A long while later, his expression relaxed and he said, "Your cultivation art truly differs from my own profound yin arts. It isn't even a devil Dao cultivation art. It is only natural for a divine ancestor such as I to see this. However, you have a fiend core avatar and happen to come across this place. It is proper for this old man to be careful. Still, this old man has another question for you. Apart from the Jade slip, what else did you acquire from that corpse?" Han Li's expression stirred upon hearing this, and he faintly felt as if this long period of intimidation was all for this final moment. With that thought, Han Li didn't answer and instead calmly asked, "Since senior has cultivated a profound soul body but was trapped here for so many years, there must be many restrictions and flaws to the profound soul demonification technique. For example, there is no way to travel underneath sunlight, and you find yourself vulnerable to a particular type of magic tool. Humph, do you believe I will actually tell you this? The youth couldn't help but grow furious and abruptly interrupt him. Han Li calmly spoke with an indifferent expression. Of course not. So does Senior really believe that Junior is going to tell him about something that Junior shouldn't know about? When Xiao Cha heard those cold, mocking words, he was shocked, and his furious expression gradually faded away. Chapter 429, Ruined Map Reconstruction. Since you are unwilling to answer, then how about? The Bone Sage changed the topic as if wanting to change his question, but at that moment, clear ringing suddenly came from the old devil's body. The beautiful sounds left Han Li stunned. When the Bone Sage heard this, he was startled but revealed an expression of joyful disbelief. He no longer paid attention to Han Li and struck his own abdomen. With a tear, a white rib bone shot out from his body and flew once around him before landing in his palm. The clear rings were coming from this rib bone. Han Li blinked and revealed puzzlement. He was at a complete loss. With the rib bone in his hand, the old devil's smile grew even stronger. Crush. The old devil exerted force into his grip and turned the bone to dust. A white sphere of light floated from the dust, revealing a black cricket. It croaked without end inside the light sphere, but once it saw the Bone Sage, it stopped chirping and left the light sphere before entering his body. The Bone Sage broke into laughter and clutched the light sphere in his hand. The white light soon disappeared to reveal an embroidered cloth stained yellow from age. When Han Li saw this item, he was shocked. That embroidered cloth appeared rather familiar. Didn't it strongly resemble the same map fragment he acquired from the Black Fiend Sect Master 1? Chapter 331. Could it be they had some relation to one another? Han Li's mind stirred. He knew that this could be a clue to possibly unravel the mystery behind the map fragment. He couldn't help but observe his every movement with wide eyes. Unfortunately, after taking a quick look at it, the Bone Sage quickly stuffed the embroidered cloth into his robe. He then calmly gazed at Han Li and said, "Since you have no relation to my two traitorous disciples, I don't have any time to waste on you. I have an important matter to attend to, so let us part ways. I will give you a word of advice before I leave. If you stay here for too long, my sinful disciple might take notice and will rush over here." With that said, the Bone Sage ignored any response Han Li might have had, and turned into a streak of blood light with a sneer, hastily flying past Han Li towards the entrance. Han Li was initially stunned but soon frowned. His body immediately turned into a blur of flourishing azure light, making a full circle around the main hall. After collecting his former comrades' storage pouches and magic treasures, along with turning their corpses to ash, he hurriedly flew out of this place. It seemed the old devil held no interest in the storage pouches of core formation cultivators. Although he didn't know whether he looked upon the belongings of core formation cultivators with disdain, or was merely being negligent due to a pressing matter, it proved to be a very convenient situation for Han Li. However, he couldn't help but think of the embroidered cloth. He was also afraid that if he was too slow in leaving, the Bone Sage might lay a trap at the exit which would prove greatly troublesome. But when Han Li thought of how the Bone Sage had seized control of his avatar, Crooked Soul, Han Li felt a painful fire burning in his heart. However, from his opponent's attack, Han Li felt that his odds of success weren't high, causing him to feel helpless. With that thought, Han Li flew to the surface. That old devil had long disappeared without a trace, leaving Han Li in awe of his amazing movement technique. But when Han Li saw that it was so peaceful and quiet all around him, he recalled how so many people had entered and only he managed to leave. He couldn't help but feel an indescribable sense of cold loneliness in his heart. But as soon as those negative emotions appeared, they were thrown to the back of his mind. After all, the path of cultivation was long and arduous. Now was not the time to mourn. Han Li didn't dare to stay for much longer. After getting his bearings, he immediately fled from the island and reached for his storage pouch. After a short moment, an embroidered cloth appeared in his hand with a flash of white light. As he looked at it, he felt his heart thump. He didn't need to carefully inspect it to know that this was undeniably related to the Bone Sage's own. Although Han Li didn't know what secrets it concealed, it had caused that deep old schemer to lose his self-control. With that in mind, Han Li couldn't help but examine the embroidered cloth. The originally indistinct map had completely disappeared. However, the map had been replaced with a pattern of a small golden sword of light. Regardless of how Han Li turned the embroidered cloth, the sword of light always pointed towards the northwest. The sword point shot a red line straight towards the edge of the embroidered cloth, releasing a faint fluorescence. Han Li frowned. Although he didn't know the item's specific purpose, if he didn't understand such a simple map as this, then he must be an idiot. This clearly illustrated that the object's holder would meet an opportunity, should they follow the small sword to some location. While grasping the map, Han Li became lost in contemplation. It seemed the Bone Sage had been so hurried because the matter regarding the map was time-sensitive. In addition to his happy expression, it was obvious that the prize was certain to be great. Once Han Li came to this conclusion, he immediately turned his body in the direction indicated by the sword on the map. If he didn't rush, the prize would be seized by others as long as the map didn't expire first. After some slight consideration and a long while of hesitation, he finally decided to follow this direction and left the desolate island in the blink of an eye. About a quarter-hour later, a vast, eerie black fog rushed towards the island from a distance. After circling around the cave's entrance, the fog scattered to reveal a pale-skinned middle-aged man that appeared to lack even a single drop of blood. When he saw that the restrictions and formation spells were destroyed, and the spirit seal pillar had been pushed to the side, he immediately entered the underground cave with furrowed brows. After a short moment, a long, resentful roar came from down below, causing the nearby land to tremble. The middle-aged man then flew out of the cave and towards the sky as a black streak of radiance. He apprehensively looked all around and shot out several tens of streaks of black radiance with a sudden twirl. Those streaks of black radiance turned into huge black birds that searched the nearby 50 kilometers. But when the huge birds returned from their search with nothing to show, the middle-aged man's expression became extremely unsightly. He turned his head towards the sky and didn't make any other movements for a long while. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly broke out into cold laughter. "Old monster, so what if you are able to escape? You are no longer the devilish ancestor Bone Sage from long ago, and I am no longer one of your trifling core formation disciples. Once I am finished with the matters of Heaven Void Hall, I will ferret you out from the scattered star seas." With no further hesitation, he soared through the skies and transformed back into a huge black fog. Then, as if wanting to vent his anger, a black beam of light as thick as a bucket shot out of the black fog, causing the entrance of the cave to cave in and turn into ruins. Afterwards, the black fog flew into the distant sky like a meteor streak. Naturally, Han Li was unaware of what had just taken place. He was flying in the direction of the map, pushing his magic treasure at his greatest speed. As he was fearful of coming across the Bone Sage, Han Li was extremely vigilant and would occasionally release the entirety of his spiritual sense to check for an ambush. After several days of flight, nothing unexpected had occurred, much to Han Li's relief. But one day, just as Han Li was hastening on his journey, he suddenly heard the sound of conflict coming from ahead of him. From the faint explosions and dazzling flashes of light, it seemed that there were cultivators in the midst of fighting. Han Li frowned and used his powerful spiritual sense to carefully gaze into the distance. A man and a woman were currently fighting against 3 embroidered-clothed cultivators, surrounded in an evil chi. However, their strength was pathetically low, and they were only at early foundation establishment. It seemed that the man and the woman were at a disadvantage. Han Li rubbed his nose. Since he knew they weren't a threat, he felt disinclined to taking a detour and prepared to fly past them. As for the cultivators fighting, he wouldn't bother asking them anything. He had something important to attend to. With that thought, Han Li increased his speed and rushed forth as a streak of green light, appearing before them in the blink of an eye. The combatants were greatly shocked and happened to all recoil away from him and retrieve their magic tools. As Han Li flew past them, he paused for a moment and casually swept his gaze over them. Yi, the female cultivator from the male-female pair, seemed to recognize Han Li. She shouted with joy, "Elder Han, I am the main disciple of the exquisite sound sect's envoy of the right. Those 3 cultivators are from our sect's great enemy, the poisonous dragon union. Sometimes I wonder if I should leave these in." Chapter 430, When See You. Han Li was startled by her yell, and he couldn't help but look over and examine the woman. "You're a disciple of the exquisite sound sect?" Han Li asked with a calm expression. The young woman appeared to be about 20 years of age and had a face of soft jade with skin as fair as snow. Her flowery expression of pleasant surprise revealed a very sweet charm. Disciple Wen Siyu pays her respect to Elder Han. This lovely young woman hastily flew to Han Li's side and respectfully gave him a bow. Her body wasn't lacking in neither grace, given her firm chest and ample bottom. In addition to the young woman's sweet voice, he could detect an intoxicatingly sweet fragrance from her. Han Li calmly sized her up and slowly asked, "How did you recognize me? Have I seen you before?" Han Li felt slightly puzzled as he was certain that this was the first time he had seen her. Although this is the first time Junior has paid her respects to Senior, the sect master hung several of Senior's portraits in the offerings hall. "I've seen them every time I pass by," the young woman respectfully said. Han Li was stunned and didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. He didn't think that those three women from the Exquisite Sound Sect would actually do something like this. This must be one of their method of disseminating the fact that he had become the Exquisite Sound Sect's elder. Despite feeling slightly gloomy, his face didn't reveal the slightest peculiarity, and he turned his gaze towards the middle-aged man to the side and spoke with a slight smile. "Brother Wen, I haven't seen you in so many years. It seems you're doing well." Ever since the middle-aged man saw Han Li, his face had appeared odd. Now, his expression had become even more complicated. When he looked at Han Li, his gaze seemed to contain both admiration and a feeling of self-inferiority. "I didn't expect that Senior Han would still recognize me. Although I've seen your portrait at the Exquisite Sound Sect, I didn't dare to believe it given that so much time had passed. Congratulations on Senior's core formation." He spoke with slight bitterness. This middle-aged man was actually the youth Wen Qiang that Han Li originally met at Stalwart Star Island. Although his appearance resembled that of his youth, his hair was now growing white, and his face showed signs of aging. It seemed he was on the verge of appearing elderly. "There is no need for Brother Wen to call me Senior. After all, we were acquainted when we were still of the same generation," Han Li spoke with a smile. Han Li saw that Wen Qiang was only at mid-foundation establishment and wouldn't have any hope of core formation. Han Li couldn't help but inwardly sigh upon seeing a youth at his prime had become so elderly. In truth, even if Wen Xiu didn't yell for him to stop, he would have done so anyways. With his outstanding memory, he would have recognized Wen Qiang from a single glance despite not having met him many times. As he had originally given Han Li a good impression, it was only natural for Han Li to lend him aid in passing and not stand by and watch him die. After hearing Han Li, when Qiang stated that he didn't dare to do so, Han Li could only follow suit. When the young woman heard the two chatting, her mouth slightly widened from alarm. Her soft, spirited eyes blinked several times, wanting to ask something, but she was interrupted when Han Li spoke with a cold voice towards the three enemies. "Where do you three think you're going? Did I say you could leave?" The three enemy cultivators were panic-stricken upon seeing a hostile core formation cultivator arrive. But after seeing that Han Li didn't seem to mind them and was happily chatting, they couldn't help but slowly fall back and test their luck. The three turned deathly white upon hearing Han Li. After exchanging a mutual glance, they immediately flew off on their magic tools with defensive magic tools and barriers of all colors at their side. "Humph, you're courting death." Han Li coldly snorted and lightly flicked his finger, shooting out three brilliant streaks of azure light, appearing behind them in a single instant. PFF, PFF. The three cultivators' magic tools and defensive barriers were shredded through like paper by the thick swordlights. With three simultaneous miserable screams, their magic tools filled the sky with fluorescent lights before disappearing without a trace. After the young woman and when Qiang watched Han Li's extermination of the three Poison Dragon Union cultivators, they couldn't help but look at Han Li with even greater respect. Han Li inwardly nodded his head. While these three azure essence sword streaks appeared unremarkable, they actually consumed a significant amount of spiritual power. Regardless, Han Li was quite satisfied as they were able to kill Foundation establishment cultivators in a single strike. It seemed that the azure essence sword streaks had increased in power along with his cultivation. Han Li seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Ah, that's right. Since you both have the surname Wen, does that mean?" When Wen Qiang heard Han Li, his face revealed embarrassment and he replied, "Senior Han jests. Siyu is my daughter." Han Li was stunned, but soon burst into laughter. "Then I must congratulate Brother Wen. Fellow Taoist Siyu has reached Foundation establishment at such a young age. Perhaps she will one day reach core formation as well." Having heard that, Wen Qiang laughed with a prideful expression. "I won't conceal this from Senior Han. Siyu is truly my pride. She became Foundation establishment after only a little more than 20 years. I have high hopes for her. While I won't be progressing any further, I can only hope for her to travel farther than I ever did." Wen Qiang then looked at the young woman with a tender expression, causing Siyu to turn her head away in embarrassment. Han Li looked at the young woman with a smile and faintly nodded his head, when Siyu was gifted with remarkable aptitude. Afterwards, Wen Qiang and Han Li each spoke about their own experiences. Although they didn't have a particularly deep friendship, meeting an old friend after many years of separation was always a pleasant matter. From their excited chat, Han Li heard a story that was not uncommon to cultivators with mediocre aptitudes throughout the scattered star seas. Not long after Han Li departed, when Qiang's master had met the end of his lifespan during cultivation. After muddling around Stalwart Star Island for several tens of years, he managed to barely break through to the Foundation establishment stage. After that, he started to wander through all sorts of islands and accumulated experience. Then after some time, he met a female disciple from the Exquisite Sound Sect and became one of their external affairs disciples. From then on, he handled all sorts of miscellaneous tasks for the Exquisite Sound Sect. But shortly after his daughter Siyu was born, his wife died from a strange illness. Due to his deep love for his wife, he decided not to remarry and raised Wen Siyu by himself. Naturally, she had been brought in to be a disciple of the Exquisite Sound Sect. Having heard this, Han Li inwardly sighed several times and bitterly laughed. In contrast, his own experiences were quite simple. Apart from cultivation, there was practically nothing for him to talk about. But in the end, Han Li asked the father-daughter pair why they were fighting at this remote place. In response, Wen Qiang appeared furious while his daughter appeared sad. Han Li was greatly baffled by this. After some hesitation, Wen Qiang slowly gave an explanation. When Wen Siyu grew to adulthood, she was to marry a young cultivator with limitless prospects and become his Dao companion. Unfortunately, the young cultivator perished in a fight against other cultivators shortly after they were wed. As such, the newly available and charming Wen Siyu attracted the eyes of many male cultivators in the sect. But as Wen Siyu was just recently widowed, she didn't wish to quickly remarry. As such, she turned down her many requests for pair cultivation. Consequently, she unconsciously offended a high ranker in the Exquisite Sound Sect and was assigned to a dangerous and strenuous task. She had to retrieve a precious material from within the Poison Dragon Union's territory. With his daughter in such a dangerous situation, Wen Qiang naturally couldn't stand idly by and instead accompanied his daughter on the journey. However, their secret tasks had been discovered by the Poison Dragon Union at an unknown time through unknown means. As a result, the father-daughter pair had been chased down by 3 Poison Dragon Union cultivators and were forced to fight with their lives on the line. If chance had not brought Han Li by them, they were certain to have met a horrible end. Upon hearing Wen Qiang's indignant words, Han Li stroked his chin and remained silent for a long while. Wen Qiang's words implied that he wanted Han Li to seek justice on their behalf. However, this was only one side of the story, and he wasn't willing to recklessly involve himself in the internal affairs of the Exquisite Sound Sect over such a shallow friendship. If you want to remember she ever existed, you'd better remember that she was beautiful. Chapter 431, Heaven Void Hall. After muttering to himself, Han Li slowly replied while Wen Qiang watched expectantly. Since Brother Wen is also an Exquisite Sound Sect member, he should know I am a member only in name. I have never involved myself with the inner affairs of the sect. However, if this matter is as Brother Wen described and fellow Taoist Siyu has been greatly wronged, I will mention this matter to Fairy Violet Spirit the next time I see her. But if she doesn't do anything about this, I'm not quite sure what can be done. Having heard that Han Li was unwilling to personally take matters into his own hands, Wen Qiang felt slightly disappointed. He also knew that his friendship with Han Li wasn't deep. Even saving him and his daughter could already be considered as cherishing their old friendship. He repeatedly expressed his thanks without any complaints and had Wen Siyu kowtow in respect to Han Li, but Han Li had refused with a smile. However, Han Li then asked with slight confusion, "Isn't fellow Taoist Siyu the personal disciple of the envoy of the right? Why don't you raise this matter to her?" Wen Siyu appeared even sadder and explained with a soft voice, "Senior Han doesn't know this, but this mission was assigned by a close relative of my master. My master had wished for us to become Dao companions, but my refusal caused her to become very angry." With that said, the woman wore a helpless expression, revealing an appearance of tragic beauty. Han Li couldn't help but stare for a moment before forcing himself to turn his head towards Wen Qiang for fear of looking longer. He said, "I am here on an important matter and cannot journey together with you. I will be taking my leave." Han Li cupped his hands towards them. The pair naturally refrained from making any unpleasant requests for him to stay and hastily said words of thanks. Han Li then faintly smiled and shot through the sky as an azure streak of light. The father-daughter pair looked in the direction that the azure streak disappeared. After a long while, Wen Xiyu spoke in an angry, cute voice, "Father, you never told me that you were actually old friends with our sect's elder Han. From your chat, you also seem to have met him before he entered core formation. Could you tell your daughter about it? Elder Han is actually quite a mystery to us." Near the end, her angry voice had turned to one of strong curiosity. When Qiang sighed and lovingly said, "Your father and Senior Han had only met several times. We don't have a deep relationship. In addition, I had met him when our cultivations were quite low. When I suddenly saw him in the offerings hall, I was truly shocked and felt restless several days later. For this person to actually enter core formation and become our sect elder is a truly inconceivable affair." When Qiang couldn't help but then recall the moment when Han Li recognized him. He then stopped talking and became absent-minded for a short time. Wen Xiyu saw that her father was thinking of something and silently waited at his side. The father and daughter peacefully floated in the sky with their clothes fluttering in the wind. The nearby empty oceans suddenly flooded with activity. Every few days, cultivators hurriedly flew across this location high above with pleasant surprise. At this location, there was a huge palace floating in the sky without the slightest movement. The palace was about 400 meters tall and was crafted from flawless white jade. It was exquisitely beautiful and released sparkling twinkles of light. Surrounding it was a layer of dense golden light that encompassed about 4,000 meters in height. The cultivators that were traveling to it flew into the palace without any hesitation and easily passed through the barrier with a flash of white light. One day, a streak of azure light arrived below the palace and came to a sudden stop. The azure light faded away to reveal a youth with a common appearance, Han Li, who had followed the direction of his map. He looked at the embroidered clothed map with slight hesitation and glanced around, ensuring that nothing else was nearby. He had found nothing after looking down at the sea for a long time. Han Li's hesitation only grew stronger. With a sudden thought coming to mind, he abruptly raised his head. Upon seeing the exquisite jade palace floating among the clouds, Han Li gasped with surprise. He blankly stared at the palace for a long while before he recovered from his shock. He didn't immediately approach the palace hall, instead deciding to deliberate for a moment. But suddenly, his expression stirred and his body flashed with azure light, causing him to disappear without a trace. A short moment later, a scarlet cloud rushed over and stopped close to where Han Li had just been. The red cloud scattered to reveal a red-haired old man with an embroidered cloth in hand. He looked at the embroidered cloth in his hand and coldly examined his surroundings. When he turned his head to the sky and saw the palace, he couldn't help but reveal joy. Soon after, the red-haired old man flew up into the sky in a red cloud without a second thought. Then with a flash of white light, the old man passed through the gold light barrier. Han Li reappeared nearby shortly after. With a creased brow, his expression began incessantly shifting. In the following week, Han Li patiently concealed himself nearby and saw two other core formation cultivators enter the palace's light barrier. They also had an embroidered cloth map. One day, Han Li's patience had finally run dry, and he flew towards the golden barrier. With a flip of his hand, he took out his map and slowly poured spiritual power into it. The map then released a white spiritual light and wrapped Han Li within it. Taking a step forward, Han Li easily passed through the barrier as if nothing was there. After turning his head back toward the light barrier, Han Li flew towards the beautiful palace without any lingering hesitation. After flying closer to the palace, Han Li became aware of the huge, silver, ancient characters that hung 40 meters above the entrance of the palace, Heaven Void Hall. Not only were these characters grand and imposing, but the stroke edges were extremely incisive. After only a quick glance, his eyes felt a faint, dull ache. He hastily lowered his head in fright, not daring to look any further. With gritted teeth, Han Li then carefully walked into the palace as he gazed into its depths. Han Li was amazed once he entered. He saw a straight, narrow passage made completely of translucent, fine jade. He couldn't see its end. It was 9 meters wide and 12 meters tall, causing those who walked through it to feel an uncomfortable mental pressure. Han Li frowned and released his spiritual sense after some thought, but his expression immediately revealed surprise as his spiritual sense met a wall in every direction and was forcibly bounced back. He couldn't even spread out his spiritual sense, let alone search the palace with it. Han Li's eyes flashed with spirited light, and he attentively examined a jade wall, discovering a flicker of faint sparkling light. He would have missed it had he not been paying close attention. It seemed this entire passage restricted those with great capabilities. Han Li then extended his finger and lightly stroked the fine jade. Although he couldn't recognize the exact type of restrictions, he knew they contained deep and immeasurable spiritual power, causing Han Li's heart to slightly tremble. He silently withdrew his finger and pondered for a moment with chin in hand before raising his head and deciding to walk forward. With narrowed eyes, Han Li calmly looked around the interior of the passage as he walked through. Since there were restrictions in place, he didn't have to be fearful that someone was concealed nearby and was about to ambush him, allowing him to continue on without fear. However, this ravine-like passage was truly long. He walked for the time it took to finish a meal, before finally reaching its end where an exit made of water-blue radiance appeared before his eyes. With roused spirits, Han Li hurriedly walked through it. Han Li's eyes shrunk and he instantly grew alarmed. The blue radiance revealed huge hall. The hall spanned 1,500 meters and was extremely imposing. Even if several thousand people were present, it wouldn't be crowded in the slightest. But even odder was that several tens of huge jade pillars were evenly distributed throughout the hall. Not only was the jade pillar several meters thick, but it was also exquisitely carved with all sorts of rare, strange beasts that some of which he had never seen before. Each one was vivid and lifelike, containing their own unique spiritual chi. At the very top of these pillars were several tens of cultivators, each wearing their own clothes and standing or sitting at their own volition. Apart from a few cultivators, each of them were monopolizing a single pillar. Furthermore, there was nobody loudly talking. They were all minding their own business. Han Li's arrival had lazily drawn the attention of a small portion of the cultivators. However, a few of them revealed shock upon seeing him. Han Li revealed a bitter smile, as he had also recognized them. Nindato. TL note, the Master of Bones, Xiao Cha, will now be referred to as the Bone Sage, Xiao Cha. Chapter 432, Grandmaster Zenith Yin. Among the people already in the hall was the Bone Sage that he had separated from recently. He was sitting cross-legged at a jade pillar in the corner of the hall, icily staring at him with unconcealed surprise. At another jade pillar was a woman staring at Han Li with surprise. She was the exquisite sound sex fairy violet spirit. An elegant man wearing an azure jacket with a composed appearance stood at her side. When the man saw that fairy violet spirit's expression was slightly odd, he couldn't help but take measure of Han Li. Seeing that Han Li appeared youthful, his eyes coldly glinted, and he asked Fairy Violet Spirit a few questions. As a result, Fairy Violet Spirit gracefully smiled and whispered to the man as if she were explaining Han Li's identity. Han Li frowned and turned his eyes away from them. His gaze focused on another area where someone had gazed at Han Li with ill intent. Han Li was baffled to find an old man with a face of fury looking towards him. Han Li was startled for a moment before recognizing him and feeling annoyed. That person was the Six United Palace's Elder Miao. Due to the matter of the infant carp beast, Elder Gu had wished to kill him. However, Han Li took advantage of the great damage to his origin chi and his wondrous formation spell restrictions to turn the tables and eliminate him. Many years had passed since this had occurred, but Elder Miao still recognized him. It seemed he felt rather deeply about Elder Gu's death. Han Li inwardly muttered to himself, but found he didn't particularly care about it anymore. After observing the rest of the hall, there were no other cultivators he recognized. Thus, after some slight hesitation, he casually found a jade pillar with no one on it and flew to its top. He sat cross-legged before sizing up a few of the other cultivators that he didn't recognize. Because Han Li's spiritual sense was restricted, he wasn't able to make out the cultivation of others. He only knew that a majority of cultivators here were at core formation or higher, with foundation establishment cultivators in a small minority. There may even be a nascent soul eccentric or two among them. With that in mind, Han Li carefully examined the others while he sat on the pillar. Some time later, he had identified the two that were most likely to be nascent soul cultivators. One was a yellow-robed, thin-faced old Confucian scholar. He leisurely held his back with one hand while looking through a shabby jade slip with the other. He occasionally swayed his head with interest. He seemed incredibly bookish. The other was a beautiful middle-aged woman wearing spotless white clothes. She was surrounded with a bone-chilling aura, preventing any strangers from approaching her. At the moment, the icy beauty was expressionlessly cleaning her jet-black longsword. She appeared extremely proud. Ever since Han Li had entered the hall, he hadn't seen her look in any other direction. Although the other cultivators also appeared calm and indifferent, their easy mannerisms seemed somewhat forced when compared to those two. In addition, a large portion of the cultivators in the hall gazed at these two with a trace of respect that was absent when they looked at other cultivators. It was this slight difference that made Han Li certain that these two were nascent soul experts. Originally, Han Li understood that apart from those two, there were certain to be other extraordinary individuals that couldn't be underestimated. A most obvious example would be the Bone Sage. Although the old devil's cultivation was only at late core formation, he was far superior to other late core formation cultivators in a fight, second only to true nascent soul cultivators. Who could possibly know what other hidden tigers laid in wait amongst the group? Han Li inwardly muttered to himself for a moment, having seemingly forgotten that he himself could dispatch similar grade cultivators without much effort. In any case, Han Li grew increasingly cautious after his musings and would occasionally ponder the true strength of those gathered here. This probably wasn't going to end up being a boring meeting of cultivators. After all, the mystery displayed in the embroidered cloth map fragment and the floating heaven void hall had even attracted a few nascent soul cultivators. This guaranteed that something extraordinary was about to occur. Unfortunately, he was completely ignorant of the details. Otherwise, he would be planning his future actions, thereby reducing his exposure to danger and limiting any disadvantages he might suffer from sudden surprises. With the situation being what it was, Han Li could only act in accordance to how events played out. As Han Li was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a sound transmission from the Bone Sage. "Youngster, I didn't expect you'd also have a heaven void map fragment. How about we cooperate in this treasure hunt?" Treasure hunt? Upon hearing those two words, Han Li's heart glowed with joy, knowing that it was correct for him to come. With an unchanged expression, he calmly replied, "How does Senior intend to cooperate with me? Please give me an explanation." The Bone Sage's expression brightened after hearing that Han Li hadn't refused. Just as he was thinking about what to say, two people swaggered into the hall. When Han Li and the Bone Sage saw the two, their expressions greatly changed. While Han Li's expression had only slightly paled, the Master of Bone's face completely distorted with his eyes revealing a bloodthirsty craze. Fortunately, his mind was quick, and this expression only lasted for an instant before his calm expression reappeared. The two that entered hadn't taken notice of the Bone Sage's abnormality. However, Han Li inwardly grumbled upon seeing the two, as one of them was Zenith Yin Island's young island Lord Wu Chu. Although Han Li was unfamiliar with the pale-faced, slender-eyed middle-aged cultivator by his side, he had a faint guess about who he was and couldn't help but feel regret for having come here. At that moment, the middle-aged man brought Wu Chu into the hall and coldly swept his gaze in every direction. Soon, his gaze fell upon a cultivator with a sallow face, and he coldly laughed. The sallow-faced cultivator paled, and his body slightly trembled, but after some quick thought, he immediately stood straight. "Good, very good." After finishing his chilling laughter, his eyes coldly glinted and fell upon Han Li. When his gaze fell upon Han Li, he felt as if a viper was staring at him and felt his hair stand on end. Despite his calm appearance, his heart was in great disarray. Han Li immediately felt amazement. The middle-aged man unexpectedly revealed a trace of unconcealed pleasant surprise upon seeing him. Although his expression soon became calm once more, Han Li was able to clearly see it. This caused Han Li to be at a loss with doubts pouring into his mind. The Bone Sage also saw this and was stunned, but soon after his eyes shifted several times, and he lowered his head in contemplation. At that moment, the middle-aged man blankly looked at the old Confucian scholar and the beautiful woman for a moment before restraining his cold gaze. He amiably cupped his hands to the two and said, "I didn't expect to see South Crane Island's Brother Ching and White Wall Mountain's Lady Wen. I'm truly sorry for not recognizing you. There is no disrespect. My clan is comparable to your own Zenith Yin Island. We only happen to meet by chance. After all, this is an opportunity that only occurs once every 300 years. I've also heard that man Husey acquired a Heaven Void map fragment as an offering. He should be coming shortly. When the time comes, us old bastards will gather together once more." The old man put away the jade slip and spoke with an insincere smile. "Man Husey is also coming." The middle-aged man's expression changed, as if greatly fearful of that name. "That's right. I heard that his life is quickly coming to an end. He is coming to Heaven Void Hall to find life-prolonging fruit to refine a few life-lengthening pills in hopes he may live a few more years. The old man spoke proudly with a voice containing hints of cold mockery. The icy beautiful woman continued to look down at her sword treasure as she cleaned it, completely ignoring their conversation. When Han Li heard their conversation, he couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. He had acquired quite a bit of information from those few words. The middle-aged man next to Wu Chu was actually Grandmaster Zenith Yin, and their words revealed that there was yet another nascent soul cultivator to come. There were also life-prolonging spirit medicines in Heaven Void Hall. Inconceivable. It was no wonder that nascent soul experts so impatiently rushed here. Chapter 433, Ninekal Spirit Ginseng. As Han Li pondered about the information he had just received, he was also wondering whether or not he wanted to wade through these muddy waters. Although he didn't know what was about to come, this strange palace in the sky seemed similar to the state of Yue's trial by blood and fire, and had been completely constructed by ancient cultivators. Although it contained many treasures, its dangers were quite plentiful as well. Grandmaster Zenith Yin's unexplainable expression had scared him quite a bit. Could he be plotting something? Regardless of anything else going on, it would be wiser for Han Li to immediately withdraw. However, he had gathered from those old eccentrics words that this place only opened once every 300 years. If he were to turn back now, he'd never have another chance. This was enough cause for further hesitation. While Han Li was lost in thought, he suddenly heard the Bone Sage's voice. "Youngster, do you have anything on you that Zenith Yin might want by any chance? I can't think of another reason that he would look at you like that. If I guessed correctly, he wants to dispose of you." Although the Bone Sage spoke indifferently, his words obviously contained a trace of mockery. Han Li mentally snorted and replied, "If Island Lord Zenith Yin were to learn that your esteemed self is here, he'd probably be very interested. He'd almost certainly want to have a proper chat with his long-lost master." "You dare threaten me?" the Bone Sage asked sinisterly. "I wouldn't dare. Given Senior's status and abilities, how could I ever dare to do so? However, it's probably in Senior's best interest to not take delight in others' misfortune. Else, I might accidentally have a slip of the tongue when my life is in danger and unintentionally implicate Senior." Han Li replied expressionlessly. The Bone Sage remained silent for some time. Han Li believed he had flown into a rage from embarrassment and didn't wish to speak with Han Li any further. But that had only been greater cause of shock when he suddenly heard a string of icy words that left him pleasantly surprised. "Do you wish to form a nascent soul?" "Senior, what are you getting at?" Han Li asked, forcefully restraining the excitement within his heart. What do I mean? My words were quite simple. I know of an item that will double your chances of forming a nascent soul. It's located in Heaven Void Hall. There's no other item that can do this. If you join hands with me and seize the opportunity to eliminate my traitorous disciple Zenith Yin, I will tell you the method for acquiring it. How about it? Since I cultivated the Tao of the Demon Ghost, I can't use this item. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even mentioned it to you. And even if you do not agree to join hands with me, it seems that Zenith Yin will take the initiative to find you either way. When that time comes, The Bone Sage made use of the carrot and the stick while expressing his unconcealed malice towards Grandmaster Zenith Yin. Han Li didn't immediately decide. He instead sat in silence and frowned, deep in thought. The Bone Sage's youthly incarnation also appeared quite calm and unhurried. He believed a core formation cultivator was incapable of refusing such a huge offer. He just needed to calmly wait for Han Li's eventual agreement. At that moment, Grandmaster Zenith Yin and Wu Chu flew to the old Confucian scholar's pillar and chatted intermittently, occasionally saying something to the beautiful woman surnamed Wen. However, the beautiful woman closed her eyes after she finished polishing her sword. It seemed she didn't pay them any attention. Grandmaster Zenith Yin didn't appear angry or embarrassed at this cold treatment and continued to speak with a smile. It was clear he's the shrewd type. And Li slightly brought these people into his gaze and grew increasingly fearful of Grandmaster Zenith Yin. Not only was this person's cultivation deep, but his wits far exceeded that of ordinary cultivators. What else could have forced the Bone Sage to tread the Tao of a demon ghost and abandon his path to reincarnation? The Bone Sage clearly hated not being able to grind his traitorous disciples' bones and scatter their ashes. However, regardless of the resentment between the old devil's Bone Sage and Zenith Yin's gaze towards Han Li was far from friendly. Although it can't be said that he had no chance of escaping from a nascent soul cultivator, In a true confrontation, that possibility was pathetically small. After all, there was too great of a difference between early core formation and the nascent soul stage. Even if his magic treasure and gold-devouring beetles were even more powerful, he would still be slaughtered without much effort on their part. After some consideration, Han Li eventually responded to the Bone Sage. "Give me an explanation of that item you mentioned. Does it have anything to do with what you said about becoming a nascent soul cultivator?" "Of course, so long as you are willing to join hands with me, I will unquestionably divulge a few things to you." The Bone Sage was slightly delighted and stealthily replied. Han Li didn't immediately respond and bluntly closed his eyes, pretending to refine qi. The item is called Ninkril Spirit Ginseng. It is an item of transformed heaven-earth spiritual qi. Although its main body is a spiritual herb, its pure spiritual nature causes it to transform into an animal or insect, allowing it to move about on their own. It is quite good at hiding. Many years ago, I saw this item in the Heaven Void Hall. At the time, my cultivation was far too low, and I didn't have any appropriate magic tools on hand. As such, I was forced to let it go. The second time I came here, I was at the nascent soul stage and no longer needed to waste the effort to acquire it, but it should prove quite useful to you. The Bone Sage spoke as if he had been unwilling to let it go. Ninkril Spirit Ginseng. Han Li took a cold breath. Han Li had long known of this legendary immortal herb. Although Han Li had often seen this herb mentioned in ancient medicine herb records, he believed this item had appeared in the mortal world during times of antiquity. Could this item actually exist in Heaven Void Hall? Nevertheless, discovering one or two stalks of such an immortal herb wasn't impossible. However, this was that first time that he heard the Ninkril Spirit Ginseng was useful in condensing a nascent soul. The records had always been vague about its specific uses and hardly mentioned them. Could this old devil have lied to me so that I would cooperate with him? Han Li suspected. Perhaps having guessed Han Li's doubt, the Bone Sage continued, "Be at ease. When we break through the barrier, I will first help you acquire this item at the second pass. Then after we eliminate my traitorous disciple, I will give you a secret recipe. So long as you create the medicine pill in accordance to its instructions, it will greatly increase your odds of condensing a nascent soul. However, I've also come to Heaven Void Hall in search of useful cultivation materials. When the time comes, you will have to lend me your assistance so that I might prove more successful." The Bone Sage took the initiative to eliminate Han Li's doubts and raised a condition that answered a majority of Han Li's suspicions. "Fine, if you're truly certain about being able to kill Zenith Yin, I might lend my assistance." Han Li eventually agreed to forming a temporary alliance with the Bone Sage. In truth, this alliance was quite weak, and it was quite difficult to say how long it would last. Perhaps it would even fracture immediately after Grandmaster Zenith Yin had been killed. Han Li inwardly let out a long sigh. From the old devil's tone, this actually wasn't his first time here. Having an experienced ally was far better than fumbling around on his own. At the very least, he could learn a bit about the basics of Heaven Void Hall and unquestionably trust the Bone Sage's desire to kill Grandmaster Zenith Yin. With that, Han Li and the Bone Sage came to an agreement, and Han Li started to make some indirect inquiries about the Heaven Void Hall. After having a long, stealthy chat with the Bone Sage, Han Li's expression became unsightly. It seemed that opportunity and danger walked hand in hand. This trip to the Heaven Void Hall in particular would prove to be extremely dangerous. He couldn't help but sigh. Soon after, his mind drifted and he began to refine qi in meditation. Inside the hall, Han Li didn't need to worry about any sudden attacks. From his earlier tests, apart from some floating techniques and other such minor magic techniques, any other techniques couldn't be cast. Any magic power used past a certain point would dissolve. Even the magic treasures contained in one's body would be like a dead, magicless object. These restrictions were amazing. In the following week, the cultivators in the hall grew more and more numerous, eventually gathering over 100 people. The Jade pillars had long been filled by other cultivators. Those that came later could only find a spot to sit on the floor and rest there for the time being. Chapter 434, Gathering. Fewer and fewer cultivators arrived, until many days later when the gradual flow ceased. However, Grandmaster Zenith Yin and the old Confucian scholar were sitting in silence with solemn expressions. They would occasionally sweep their gaze across the room as if they were waiting for something. Could they be waiting for Man Husey? Han Li naturally noticed this and was very curious. As such, he also kept an eye out. When afternoon arrived, footsteps could be heard from the entrance of the hall. With several flashes of blue radiance, two people walked into the hall one at a time. One of them was an old Taoist with a reddish complexion, and the other was an old man dressed as a farmer with a bitter expression on his thin, dark face. After these two appeared, the cultivators in the hall became restless. A majority of people looked at the two with a trace of respect. It seemed these two were quite famous. Grandmaster Zenith Yin and the old Confucian scholar looked at them with ill intent. Grandmaster Zenith Yin's expression was particularly harsh. The two newly arrived experts returned the other party's hostile gazes upon seeing them. The old Taoist snorted and said, "Old Devil Zenith Yin, you've arrived quite early. It seems you of the Devil Tao are quite determined to come out on top during this heaven void hall." Tian Wuzi One. The Chinese letter W-U-Z-I in his name can mean enlightened one. It isn't that this grandmaster arrived early, but you hypocrites arrived far too late. As I was of the opinion that your map fragments information was false, I wasn't expecting you to arrive. This also good. This grandmaster now has the opportunity to surpass you. Grandmaster Zenith Yin responded with a sinister expression. Who is it that you think you're going to surpass, Zenith Yin? Please enlighten us. Without waiting for the old Taoist to strike back, another voice resounded throughout the hall. When Zenith Yin and the old Confucian scholar heard the new voice, their expressions greatly changed. The taciturn beautiful woman suddenly raised her head and coldly spoke while staring at the hall's entrance. Wan Tianming too. Quite suitably, his name Chinese letter Tianming means dawn or daybreak. You've arrived. It seems Lady Wen has also arrived. Why does my appearance surprise you? After this was said, a blur shot in from the outside and revealed a middle-aged man with a violet robe and jade belt. This person had a squarish face and a large brow with white, shiny teeth. He indifferently glanced at the beautiful woman before turning his gaze towards Grandmaster Zenith Yin. His very presence exuded an imposing aura. Grandmaster Zenith Yin shut his lips with an eerie expression and remained silent in response to this man's blunt gaze. This greatly shocked Han Li. He couldn't help but closely examine the new arrivals. Han Li bewilderedly guessed that since an early nascent soul cultivator such as Grandmaster Zenith Yin was somewhat fearful of them, this person must be a mid-nascent soul cultivator. From what he saw, the three new arrivals should be cultivators of the scattered star seas, righteous Tao. As for Zenith Yin and the others, they should be of the devilish Tao. The earlier restlessness of the hall had been immediately quelled by the middle-aged man's arrival. Only the faint whispering of sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment could be heard. Obviously, the middle-aged man seemed to have a higher status when compared to the other two. Wan Tianming, was my sword attendant injured by one of your disciples? The beautiful woman surnamed Wen asked this question without restraint, as if fearless of this person. That is obviously untrue. It was just that my sect's disciples saw that your sword attendant's cultivation was quite good, and they merely wanted to swap pointers. Could it be that Lady Wen wishes for a violent escalation of hostilities over such a small matter? Wan Tianming's eyes narrowed as he spoke with an indifferent expression. Swapping pointers. My sword attendant is only at early foundation establishment. Your disciples were clearly bullying her and deliberately embarrassing our sect. The beautiful woman's face grew cold. Humiliate Madam's sect? I don't dare. For the sake of the Archsaint's reputation, I will later have those disciples offer you their humble apologies. The middle-aged man slightly frowned and spoke without much care. What does this matter of mine have to do with my lord husband? If you are unwilling, then how about I use my virtuous duality sword arts to swap pointers with sect master Wan? The beautiful woman became even more furious at his words. Compare notes with Lady Wen. Let's forget that. If the Archsaint of the Six Path 3, his title, Chinese letter Six Paths, references the six paths of reincarnation, were to know that I bullied his wife, he would seek my life. I don't wish to incite a great war between the righteous and devilish Tao. Wan Tianming chuckled as if he found it ridiculous. When the beautiful woman heard this, her face reddened. After a final glare, she dropped the matter. While the beautiful woman had let the matter drop with the middle-aged man, the middle-aged man was unwilling to do the same with Grandmaster Zenith Yin. He sneered at Grandmaster Zenith Yin, but just as he thought to say something, a rumble vibrated from the passage and faintly shook the entire hall. Apart from the nascent soul eccentrics, all of the cultivators looked towards the entrance with alarm. Grandmaster Zenith Yin and the old Confucian scholar looked at each other with a hint of concealed joy. However, Grandmaster Zenith Yin's happy expression seemed forced. Wan Tianming's eyes coldly glinted and flashed with sharp killing intent. The old Taoist and the old farmer also seemed to know who was coming and revealed a trace of worry. The vibrations soon grew stronger and more frequent, eventually revealing an exceptionally tall figure. A blue-robed eccentric with a yellow curly beard suddenly walked in. It seemed that his every step caused the entire hall to sway as if he weighed over 6,000 kilograms. Under everyone's amazed gazes, he took note of the people within the hall without any regards before settling his eyes on Wan Tianming and burst into laughter. I didn't think that great sect Master Wan would come here. It seems it was correct for me to come here. I had always wished to contest myself against sect Master Wan, but it is unfortunate that I've never had the opportunity until now. The eccentric looked at the middle-aged man with a provocative gaze. I too have looked forward to witnessing Brother Man's heaven-bearing devil arts, reputed to be the greatest defensive devilish art in the scattered star seas. Wan Tianming coldly glanced at the eccentric and fearlessly replied. He, well said, well said. I have been looking forward to experiencing Sect Master Wan's true heaven-sifting arts. The eccentric widely grinned with unconcealed eagerness. Unfortunately for him, Sect Master Wan didn't wish to cause an incident at present. He softly spoke to the old Taoist and the old farmer before the three flew up toward a jade pillar. Afterwards, the old Taoist spoke to the old core formation cultivator on the pillar with a smile. The core formation cultivator then vacated the pillar, as if he had received a great favor, and moved to a different place. When the eccentric saw this, his face held a trace of mockery. After raising his head and looking around, his body suddenly blurred before reappearing on a jade pillar. As chance would have it, the jade pillar happened to be Han Li's. When Han Li saw this, his expression turned to shock. Get lost, this place is mine. Just as the eccentric appeared on the pillar, he icily spoke to Han Li with a cold stare. Han Li's expression abruptly turned unsightly, and he involuntarily clenched his sleeved fists with force. He stayed silent, thinking of forcefully staying a moment, but he soon jumped off the jade pillar, followed by the wild laughter of the eccentric. Han Li's face was covered in an icy frost. Although it was extremely embarrassing, he could only endure it for the time being. After all, the hall's restrictions may be able to prevent cultivators from acting, but he wasn't sure whether or not these restrictions had as large of an influence on a nascent soul cultivator. He didn't wish to put his life at risk by allowing himself to be overwhelmed with emotion. Suppressing a bellyful of grievances, he found a clean spot on the floor and sat down. The old Confucian scholar asked the eccentric with a beaming smile, "Brother Man arrived quite late. I had believed that Brother Man had changed his mind. Did you not intend to come?" "How could that be possible? I had come to the Heaven Void Hall in hopes of refining life-lengthening pills. It was just that a few matters along the way had delayed me. As for Wan Tianming's arrival, I was quite amazed. Could it be that he knew that the life-extending fruit had ripened and also wanted to pick a few of them?" The eccentric stroked his yellow beard and spoke with slight doubt. "I'm not sure. However, there are countless other exceptional treasures in the Heaven Void Hall. Who knows what he came here for?" The old Confucian scholar spoke with doubt. Grandmaster Zenith Yin seemed to have thought of something and worryingly said, "Wan Tianming is among the top leading figures of the righteous Tao. Does he intend to strive for the Heaven Void Cauldron?" "Heaven Void Cauldron? That's impossible. If that item were so easily obtained, it would have long been taken away by other cultivators before they ever got the chance. Without waiting for Man Husey for. His name Chinese letter Man Husey could translate to rough barbaric tyrannical beard." To reply, the old Confucian scholar shook his head like a rattled drum. Han Li agreed, as the main character of the story had only just arrived, so how could the MacGuffin have already been taken? Naturally. Chapter 435, The Heaven Void Cauldron and the Heaven Mint Pill. That might not be certain. I heard that the disciples of the myriad gates of enlightenment have spent the past few years searching for gold thread silkworms, but information regarding their search suddenly stopped, possibly from having found them. With the assistance of these exotic insects, it is quite possible for the master of the myriad gates of enlightenment to acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron. Grandmaster Zenith Yin frowned and unconsciously looked at Wan Tianming and the others with great worry. The three righteous Tao nascent soul cultivators were currently sitting down cross-legged on a single pillar, as if they had no intention of speaking. "Humph, not only is it possible that Wan Tianming possesses gold thread silkworms, I've heard that you, Zenith Yin, have acquired 2 mutant fire pythons from Lee Fire Island. Your ambitions for this trip are also quite large. Man Husey shot Grandmaster Zenith Yin a glance and spoke without restraint. He appeared somewhat disdainful of Grandmaster Zenith Yin's stealthy actions. When Grandmaster Zenith Yin heard this, his expression abruptly changed several times before he recovered his calm. However, he was profusely cursing in his heart. There was no question that his own confidants had divulged this information since it had been heard by Man Husey. It seems that, in addition to acquiring the life-prolonging fruit, Man Husey wished to keep watch on Grandmaster Zenith Yin's actions along the way. Despite feeling annoyed, Grandmaster Zenith Yin spoke with a blank face. It seems my ineptitude has attracted your ridicule. I have truly acquired 2 mutant fire pythons, but their skills are shallow. As their odds of success are low, I require Brother Man's and Brother Qing's assistance. The old Confucian scholar's heart stirred and he hesitantly asked, "Assist you? Do we get any benefits?" When Grandmaster Zenith Yin heard this, he revealed a slight smile, choosing to continue with voice transmission rather than speaking. According to the information left behind by the Heaven Void Hall's master, there are several top-grade desolate antiquities left behind from ancient times. Their power should undoubtedly be unmatched. Apart from the Heaven Void Cauldron and a Heaven Mend pill, how about we evenly split the other items? The old Confucian scholar's face flashed with greed, but after some consideration, he took a look at Man Husey before replying with a voice transmission. "I have no problem with this, but it will depend on Brother Man. After all, without Brother Man to pin down Wan Tianming, I wouldn't be able to brave the risk." Grandmaster Zenith Yin wasn't surprised to hear this. He knew that this old Confucian by the name of Layman Qing Yuan, his specific title as householder, was truly an old schemer. If he didn't draw in Man Husey, this matter would have no chance of success. Thus, Grandmaster Zenith Yin turned his head to Man Husey, passed on his conditions to Man Husey with a voice transmission. "Brother Man, what do you think of my proposal? Are you interested in cooperating? After all, Brother Man should clearly understand that I have no need for the Heaven Mend pill. It serves no other purpose I can think of apart from making up for the deficiency of 5-element spiritual roots. Perhaps if Brother Man takes it, his cultivation will greatly progress, and he'll be able to break through the limits of his lifespan." Grandmaster Zenith Yin seemed not to mind the unsightly expression he had just shown and spoke excitedly. "Humph, from your plan to acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron with 2 fire serpents, I see that your mind is muddled. An unknown number of nascent cultivators have already scoured these halls, but they all returned with disappointment. Do you believe that your plan is so likely to be successful that is it worth braving these great dangers? The danger of the inner halls is far greater than the outer halls. Even if we go in as nascent soul cultivators, there is no guarantee we will come out unscathed. Every successive opening of the Heaven Void Hall doesn't end with only 1 or 2 nascent soul cultivators disappearing." Man Husey snorted and spoke with derision. "Brother Man need not worry about this. Just let me ask, if Wan Tianming truly strived for the Heaven Void Cauldron, wouldn't Brother Man want to go and watch it?" Grandmaster Zenith Yin calmly asked. Man Husey's cold smile gradually disappeared after he heard Zenith Yin's question. He narrowed his eyes and a cold glint flashed through his eyes before he slowly said, "If Wan Tianming truly wishes to brave the inner halls, then I will travel with you without question. Even if our devil Tao is incapable of obtaining the Heaven Void Cauldron, we cannot allow it to fall into the hands of the righteous Tao." That's good. So long as Brother Man lends a hand when the time comes, my previous proposal will obviously hold. Naturally, if Lady Wen is willing to lend her assistance, she is more than welcome." Grandmaster Zenith Yin glanced at the beautiful woman with a slight smile. "My purpose in coming here is to pick some spiritual herbs. The inner halls are too dangerous, so I will not be going." The beautiful woman surnamed Wen didn't bother to hear out his conditions and coldly declined. A trace of disappointment flashed from Zenith Yin's eyes. Although the beautiful woman was only at early nascent soul stage, her lord husband, the arch-saint of the 6 paths, was a towering, peerless figure amongst those that tread the devil Tao. As he was unwilling to act shamefully in front of Man Husey, he couldn't persistently ask her and could only wallow in his impotence. However, he naturally didn't dare to force the woman along. All he could do was smile and drop the matter. After all, their group of 3 wasn't at a disadvantage against the righteous Tao, and he was unwilling to offend the woman. After the devil Tao finished their discussions, Wan Tianming and the other 2 righteous Tao cultivators continued openly meditating in silence. It was unknown whether they had finished their plans or if they had prepared countermeasures. Han Li saw all of this while he was sitting in a corner. Although he was quite far away, and the majority of their speech was in sound transmissions, he could faintly guess from their occasionally malicious glances towards the righteous Tao. They were likely discussing how to deal with the sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment and the others, much to Han Li's delight. So long as the nascent soul cultivators were focused on each other, he could take advantage of the ensuing chaos to further ensure his safety. Best of all, Grandmaster Zenith Yin wouldn't be capable of attending to him. As Han Li was thinking of what could possibly further increase the chaos, two white-clothed old men appeared at the entrance of the hall. Their hair was silver, and their jackets were fluttering about, the exact image one would imagine of an immortal. As soon as the many cultivators saw the two and recognized them, their gazes revealed respect. Their appearance had brought relief to a large portion of the cultivators in the room. As for the old eccentrics of the devilish and righteous Daos, they all revealed complicated expressions, containing envy, loathing, and even helplessness. The old man with the friendlier appearance of the two smiled under the cultivators, many gazes, and kindly said, "The reason why our two sages didn't preside over this treasure hunt at the Heaven Void Hall is because they are still in seclusion. Us two enforcement elders will be supervising this grand occasion on behalf of the Star Palace in their place. The rules of this treasure hunt shall be the same as all the others. Those who casually bully the weak or kill others to seize their treasures will be stopped by us and will be hunted down by our Star Palace. However, our supervision will be limited to the outer halls. We will neither enter the inner halls or be involved with any matters that take place there. Thus, if anyone feels uncertain, do not enter the inner halls. In addition, we will not assist any fellow Taoists with the dangers in the Heaven Void halls and will not bat an eye if you perish to them. With this, everyone should understand our intentions." With that said, the white-clothed old man quickly swept their gazes past everyone in the hall like lightning. When the others felt their gaze upon them, they each turned their head away. But when Wan Tianming and Man Husey felt their gaze sweep past them, they directly returned their gaze. The white-clothed old man were initially startled before frowning. They couldn't help but mutter, "Why have these two eccentrics arrived? It seems that a bit of trouble is stirring." The cold-faced old man at his side also had a change of expression, but after a sneer, his expression returned to normal. Soon after, these two enforcement elders of the Star Palace sat down cross-legged at the sides of the entrance, not paying any attention to the uproar that had been caused by their words. All of the other core formation cultivators had greatly varying expressions ranging from worry to joy. When Han Li saw this, he couldn't help but find this odd. What did the Star Palace hope to gain by acting so benevolently? Could this be a display of the Star Palace's authority? That moment he heard the voice of the Bone Sage. "Youngster, be careful. The Star Palace aren't flawlessly virtuous. To the best of my knowledge, when either the Devil Tao or the Righteous Tao obtains too much influence, the Star Palace would suppress the respective offender, denying either of the two sides from gaining too much power. In addition, every time the Heaven Void Halls opens, quite a number of righteous and Devil Tao cultivators die from mysterious causes, possibly from the machinations of the Star Palace. Although you don't belong to the righteous or Devil Tao, you had best watch yourself. I don't wish for my plans to fail merely because I couldn't find another suitable partner." Although the Bone Sage's voice was indifferent, his words stirred great alarm in Han Li. Well, everyone technically is the MC of their own story. Chapter 436, Another Encounter with Fairy Violet Spirit. Without even the slightest deliberation, Han Li was completely certain that what the Bone Sage had said was true. After all, for the Star Palace to tower over the scattered seas for so many years, they must have resorted to using at least a few tricks. They certainly hadn't come to supervise the Heaven Void Hall today for an empty reason. They most likely held their own plans. With that thought, Han Li's eyes coldly glinted. Although he didn't reply to the Bone Sage, he immediately became increasingly vigilant of the two white-clothed elders. In the following moments, the two white-clothed old men sat still and sank into a state of chi refinement. Their eyes remained closed, and they didn't speak another word. This strange atmosphere continued for 3 days. However, only 4 new cultivators arrived during that time. None of them were nascent soul cultivators. Then a sudden change occurred on the morning of the 4th day. A series of booms echoed throughout the hall. Without any warning, a white jade stone door descended, sealing off the entire hall. The gate was covered in a layer of white mist, an obvious indication of its formidable restrictions. Soon, there was a faint boom of palace gates closing from a distance far away. A few cultivators in the hall couldn't help but express alarm, but after discovering that the nascent soul cultivators appeared calm, they felt relieved. At that moment, the two white-clothed elders from the Star Palace calmly opened their eyes and stood up. Suddenly, the other cultivators in the hall gazed at them with either confusion or realization. As for the nascent soul cultivators, they expressionlessly gazed at the two's actions in silence. The two calmly walked towards the front of the hall. But before they arrived, the end of the hall lightly trembled to soon reveal several stone slabs releasing a dazzling white radiance. Under everyone's amazed gazes, a 3-meter-wide transportation formation had suddenly appeared. Those among the many cultivators that had yet to see a transportation formation were awed at its appearance, leaving many arrogant cultivators in amazement. The two white-clothed elders walked to the front of the transportation formation and bowed over it before carefully examining it. A while later, the two glanced at each other and nodded. "All right, there are no problems with this transportation formation. You will arrive at the outer halls of the Heaven Void Halls through this. Conduct yourselves well." With that said, the white-clothed old men stepped into the transportation formation. With 2 flashes of white light, they disappeared without a trace. Afterwards, the other cultivators in the hall unconsciously looked at each other in dismay. But without waiting to see anyone's reaction, Wan Tianming dropped down from the jade pillar with the old Taoist and the dark, thin old man, walking into the transportation formation without hesitation, disappearing with 3 flashes of white light. By the time the others reacted, those that were relatively close rushed forwards. Suddenly, the transportation formation started flashing without end. In the blink of an eye, nearly half of the cultivators in the hall had disappeared. The Sage of Bones suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. Hanli's eyes flashed with a strange expression. He unconsciously turned his gaze towards Grandmaster Zenith Yin to discover that Grandmaster Zenith Yin was looking at him with an unknown intent. Greatly frightened, Hanli hastily turned his gaze away with great unrest in his heart. It seemed that Grandmaster Zenith Yin wasn't about to let him go. In his gloom, Hanli bluntly stood up and walked forward. When Grandmaster Zenith Yin saw Hanli's actions, his mouth formed a strange sneer. This caused the nearby Wu Chu to break his silence, unable to restrain himself from asking, "Venerable Ancestor, you seem to be greatly interested in that youngster. Is there something strange about him?" Wu Chu felt truly curious. "That person will prove extremely useful to me. I merely require a bit of his aid." Grandmaster Zenith Yin shook his head and spoke indifferently as if he was unwilling to inform Wu Chu. Wu Chu, who had always received Zenith Yin's favor, felt quite puzzled. At that moment, the Confucian-robed layman Qingyi lightly coughed and slowly said, "We should set off. There aren't many people left in the hall." Zenith Yin paused for a moment before sweeping his gaze past the few cultivators left in the hall. He replied with a faint smile, "Naturally. If we don't leave soon, the transportation formation will disappear. It will only reappear again a month from now." With that said, Zenith Yin turned into a black cloud and carried off Wu Chu with him. When layman Qingyi and man Husey saw this, they leisurely flew off the jade pillar. As for the beautiful woman, she had already jumped off. It appeared that she had no intention of mingling among their group. Once Hanli entered the transportation formation, he immediately appeared above a small, barren hill. After looking around, he couldn't help but be amazed. He only saw 2 men and woman not far away from him. There was no trace of any of the other cultivators. When the female cultivator caught sight of Hanli, she revealed pleasant surprise. Fairy Violet's spirit walked over to Hanli with a beaming smile. The male cultivator she was traveling with was transported to an unknown location. Hanli couldn't help but bitterly laugh at his terrible luck for having trouble placed on him. As for the other 2, one was a gray-clothed old man, while the other was a masked man covered in black robes. The old man plainly stood by while a dark green mist spiraled around the black-robed man's body. It appeared the masked man was a Devil Dao cultivator. The 2 stood apart as if they found each other unpleasant to the eye. Fairy Violet's spirit was now walking towards Hanli. This naturally aroused the 2's attention, and they couldn't help but size up Hanli. The old man's gaze was friendly, and he gave Hanli a kind smile. As for the black-robed man, his gaze was ice-cold and didn't hold the slightest emotion. Hanli calmly returned their gaze, without the slightest change in expression. At that moment, Fairy Violet's spirit had already arrived in front of Hanli. She said with a slight smile, "I didn't expect to arrive together with Senior Han. It seems I will have to trouble Elder Hand to watch over me for a bit. Otherwise, it would prove quite difficult for me to pass through this trial by myself." With that said, Fairy Violet Spirit closed her lips, appearing somewhat embarrassed. Han Li frowned and didn't immediately reply. After a moment of thought, he doubtfully asked, "Lady Violet Spirit's cultivation has made great strides. Congratulations on reaching late foundation establishment. But why has fellow Taoist Violet Spirit come to this place? This place is truly dangerous. After all, even core formation cultivators would find it difficult to survive in the Heaven Void Hall." Although Han Li had only an inkling of knowledge about the Heaven Void Halls, he understood the severity of the dangers that lay within. After hearing Han Li's question, Fairy Violet Spirit's beautiful face revealed a trace of bitterness. With a helpless tone, she said, "This woman also didn't wish to come here. But as you see, I am currently in false core stage, and I want to attempt core formation as soon as possible. However, my own aptitude is poor. The supplementary medicine pills I was able to gather together are pathetically few. In fact, I had to pay a great price to purchase a Heaven Void map fragment from someone else, so I could come here to test my luck. After all, I've heard that spiritual medicines are abundant in the Heaven Void Hall. Perhaps the heavens would watch over me and have me run across some spiritual medicines that hold great effects towards core formation. Besides, I've already made up my mind to only attempt this first trial. I will not attempt to go through with the second." Fairy Violet Spirit's expression then grew dim, appearing to be in low spirits. Han Li inwardly sighed and grew silent. Had he not practiced the 3 Essence Revolutions technique and the Great Development technique, and possessed so many medicine pills that forcefully raised his odds of core formation, he suspected his own chances at core formation would have been even lower than Fairy Violet Spirit's. With that thought, Han Li developed a feeling of empathy towards this fellow sufferer. After some further thought, his Heaven Lightning Bamboo had come from her despite the conditions, and her exquisite sound sect does send him a certain amount of spirit stones every year. Although it wasn't much, he does owe her a favor. It would be best to take advantage of this situation to repay it. With that in mind, Han Li's expression relaxed, and he said with an indifferent tone, "Since I can travel together with fellow Taoist Violet Spirit, I can afford to offer some care. However, if I were to truly run into a helpless situation, Fairy Violet Spirit had best come up with her own plans for escape." Many thanks to Elder Han. Violet Spirit naturally understands how things stand. I definitely won't slow down Elder Han. Upon seeing Han Li agree, Fairy Violet Spirit's soft beauty flourished and her eyes became radiant, stunning Han Li. Soon after, Han Li realized he had lost his self-control and hurriedly turned his head away. With a hot face, he didn't dare to further look at her. Plot go. Hey, our MC just chooses to ignore his emotions. Chapter 437, Weeping Soul Beast. This woman wasn't a peerless beauty, but that smile of hers was ravishingly beautiful and breathtaking to behold. Han Li was shocked. Had his Great Development technique reacted, Han Li would have written it off to a superior charming technique that she had used. But to great confusion, his uncharacteristic loss of control a moment ago had been entirely natural. Han Li inwardly muttered to himself before taking another look at Fairy Violet Spirit. The young woman had already returned to her humble, charming appearance. Her previous dangerously enticing and breathtaking beauty had disappeared without a trace. As Han Li felt doubt, the gray-clothed old man walked towards him. "This one is Mount Heaven Island's Ji Li. May I know the names of you fellow Taoists?" The old man cupped his hand with great politeness and greeted the two. Han Li threw his doubts to the back of his mind for the time being and replied with a smile, "I am Han Li. This woman is the exquisite sound sect's Fairy Violet Spirit." The old man was calm upon hearing Han Li's name, but once he heard the words, exquisite sound sect and violet spirit, he couldn't help but be astonished. This old man has long heard of the great reputation of the exquisite sound sect and Fairy Violet Spirit. I didn't expect that I'd finally be able to see your true appearance. How fortuitous. Although the old man said this, his eyes contained strong doubt. It was clear that the old man was surprised by how much her appearance differed from the reputation of her great beauty. Fairy Violet Spirit also saw this and merely smiled in silence. However, the old man wasn't an ordinary person. His expression quickly returned to normal before speaking to Han Li with a smile. "Since we've arrived here together through the transportation formation, it could be considered fate. Would it not be better to travel together and combine our strength for this journey? After all, the vengeful ghost haunt won't be easy to traverse. I heard that many core formation cultivators have been devoured by the ghosts of this trial, leaving not even their bones behind. When Ji Li said that last phrase, his expression unconsciously grew serious, as if he knew much about the Heaven Void Hall. When Han Li heard him say, "vengeful ghost haunt," he turned his gaze towards the distance. About 40 meters away from their small dirt cliff, he saw only an ocean of gray mist that appeared to be endless. There were gusts of evil winds blowing from the mists, faintly carrying ghostly wails and shrieks. Those that heard it felt their hearts unconsciously tremble. The ghost fog was firmly blocked from approaching the hill by a layer of faint white light that was surrounding it. Were this not the case, Han Li and the others would be too busy dealing with the feral ghosts and lonely souls brought by the mist to have such a leisurely chat. After seeing this, Han Li raised his head and looked upwards. The rolling fog seemed to conceal something, but Han Li felt some disbelief as it didn't resemble the main hall in the least. It was more like a desolate countryside. At that moment, Fairy Violet's spirit interjected herself into the conversation and spoke with deep worry. "I also heard that this first trial, the Vengeful Ghost Haunt, was originally not that difficult. But as an increasing number of cultivators fell to the ghost fog, it has become increasingly dangerous in turn. The heavy resentment carried by those fallen cultivators has transformed them into powerful malicious souls after death. They hold great envious hate towards us cultivators who challenge the halls. They are relentless and won't stop their pursuit until their quarry is dead, resulting in many cultivators' deaths in this trial whenever the Heaven Void Hall opens. In addition, I heard that in the previous opening of the Heaven Void Hall, a group of cultivators in the Vengeful Ghost Haunt spotted a fully sentient Ghost King. As a result, the entire group perished save for one." "Ghost King." Han Li stroked his chin and revealed slight surprise. Although he didn't fully understand the cultivation differences amongst ghosts, he knew that Ghost King ranked malicious spirits were equivalent to late core formation cultivators. The addition of its intelligence only made this enemy even more troublesome. Seeing that Han Li was still wearing a contemplative expression, Ji Li continued, "Although there isn't a large chance of encountering this Ghost King, it would be safer to travel together. I may be old, but I still do not wish to fall here and join the ghost fog as a malicious spirit." This old man was quite blunt. When Fairy Violet's spirit heard this, she stayed silent. As she was very intelligent, she understood that he did not raise the proposal of cooperation because she was a Foundation establishment cultivator. He was directing the offer to Han Li. As such, after her interjection, she obediently stood by Han Li's side without another word. Han Li smiled at the old man. He didn't immediately answer him and instead turned his gaze towards the black-robed man, calmly asking him, "Fellow Taoist Ji isn't going to ask that, brother. Is he not willing to cooperate?" When Han Li mentioned the black-robed man, Ji Li's face immediately became unsightly. But after a moment of hesitation, he resentfully snorted, "Humph, don't talk about that devilish Taoist." When I finished my teleportation, I amiably raised the topic of cooperation with him only to be told to get lost. If this old man's temperament wasn't kindly, I definitely wouldn't have left him be. The old man revealed great anger after he said this. Han Li remained silent and felt some interest towards this black-robed man. He turned his head towards the Devil Dao cultivator and shouted, "Is fellow Taoist interested in collaborating towards a common goal? If we join hands, we may stand a chance against the Ghost King-ranked demon if we were to encounter it." Han Li's voice wasn't loud, but it was heard with full clarity. But after hearing him, he merely glanced at them with a cold expression before indifferently turning his head away, ignoring Han Li's suggestion. "Fellow Taoist Han, I didn't speak wrongly. That person doesn't know what's good for him. Let us three set off." The old man coldly snorted towards the black-robed man. It seemed he was quite insulted by the previous rejection and had taken it to heart. Han Li faintly smiled, but before he could say something, Fairy Violet's spirit shouted out in surprise. Han Li followed her gaze and saw the black-robed man step towards the ghost fog, as if wanting to challenge the trial alone. Han Li and the other two looked on in amazement. But soon after, Ji Li sneered disdainful. This person truly wishes to bring about his own destruction. Daring to charge through the ghost fog will most likely be met with failure. Han Li paid no notice to the old man's mocking ridicule and stared at the black-robed man's every movement with narrowed eyes. He believed that the man wasn't suicidal, but that he held complete confidence in a particular method that he possessed. The black-robed man walked to the boundary between the white light barrier and the ghost fog and calmly lifted his sleeve. A ray of green light shot out and landed in front of him. It was a delicate spirit beast that appeared similar to a monkey. This small monkey was only about a foot tall with faintly glowing dark green fur. Most notably, its nose was bulging to an unusually large size as if it took up an entire half of its height. It appeared truly bizarre. Han Li was astonished by its appearance, but he didn't react. When the old man at his side saw this, he yelled with a greatly changed expression. It's a weeping soul. He actually had such a spirit beast. No wonder he was so arrogant. The old man revealed slight shock. Fairy Violet's spirit had a similar expression upon seeing the small monkey. Han Li frowned and asked, "Weeping soul beast, what kind of strange beast is it? Why have I never heard of it before?" Han Li's words brought Fairy Violet's spirit back to her senses. She then hastily gave Han Li an explanation. The weeping soul beast isn't a spirit beast that naturally comes into this world. It is a living being refined by a secret devil Dao sect from a spirit beast and a demonic soul. Although it normally doesn't have much use, it has an innate ability to consume ghosts and souls. Regardless of whether they are demonic ghosts or malicious souls, they will be absorbed with a light sniff of its nose. After being contained for a short time, it will be refined into nothingness. They are truly formidable. Fairy Violet Spirit spoke with admiration. However, Fairy Violet Spirit's tone changed and she softly sighed. "What is it?" Han Li was annoyed by her sudden stop. As Ji Li gazed at the black-robed man's disappearing figure, he said with a complicated expression, "However, this beast's refinement technique is possessed solely by that secret sect. This heaven-disrupting evil art is bloody and has a high chance of failure. It is said that the beast appears only in times of great strife in the cultivation world. Great strife in the cultivation world whenever it is seen." Han Li couldn't help but sneer. Han Li scoffed and said, "Even if the beast weren't seen, the scattered star seas will experience chaos regardless. Do you really believe that this beast could bring about disaster?" Chapter 438, Remains in the Ghost Fog. Although Han Li walked the path of immortality, he didn't hold the slightest belief in destiny or fate. In his view, immortal cultivation was merely a method of pursuing eternal life. If any true immortals were to appear before him, he would show great reverence, but he wouldn't become absolutely subservient to them. Fairy Violet Spirit and Ji Li were stunned in response to Han Li's blunt words, before revealing embarrassment. To tell the truth, it wasn't only Han Li who thought this. A majority of cultivators merely treated this weeping soul beast as a rumor. Under these circumstances, who wouldn't directly dismiss this like Han Li did? After all, topics relating to destiny and heavenly law only existed in their heart. At that moment, the black-robed man had gone deeper into the ghost fog with the weeping soul beast and had completely disappeared from sight. After glancing into the ghost fog, Han Li formed a faint smile and said, "Let us go. Since there was someone willing to scout the path, we shouldn't be so disrespectful." What does fellow Taoist Han mean? The old man Ji Li didn't seem to fully understand Han Li. Of course, he did understand what Han Li meant and would have also done this if Han Li hadn't agreed to cooperate with him. However, he viewed the black-robed man with contempt. To now take advantage of his lead in front of the other two was truly quite a loss of face. As such, he could only assume an appearance of confusion and have Han Li take the initiative to mention it. When Han Li heard the old man's words, he gave him a mysterious smile. He then wordlessly looked the lead and walked in the direction that the black-robed man had disappeared in. Naturally, Fairy Violet's spirit closely followed after him without any hesitation. Ji Li was initially stunned upon seeing them, but he soon followed after them with a red face. Once the light gray ghost fog felt living people walk into it, it flared up as if it were alive and started rolling towards the three. If common mortals were to be plagued by this gray mist, their blood essence would be immediately drained, turning them into dried-up corpses. In addition, their souls would then become a part of the ghost fog, and they would be unable to free themselves from their fates as ghosts. However, as Han Li and the other two were cultivators, they had no fear of this trifling ghost fog. With flickers of radiance, each their bodies were enveloped by their own methods of protection. Ji Li raised his hand and released a small, fire-red umbrella. It swiveled about 3 meters above his head and enveloped the old man in a red beam of light. When the ghost fog touched this red light, threads of strange azure smoke were released with a puff, followed by ghostly wails. When the ghost fog saw this, it only dared to appear menacingly before the red light and no longer approached it as if it was intelligent. Fairy Violet Spirit released 4 fist-sized balls that spiraled around her body, creating a 3-meter-wide moving boundary. The boundary was a white, sparkling square that would repel the ghost fog's slightest approach towards Fairy Violet Spirit. However, the most strange defensive method was Han Li's. Apart from a layer of lithe azure light emitting from his body, he didn't take out any magic tools or treasures. When the ghost fog neared Han Li's body, several arcs of light shot out without explanation, turning the mist into fading smoke. This strange scene astonished the other two, but neither of them were willing to take the initiative to rudely ask. During her musings, Fairy Violet Spirit seemed to faintly recall the heaven lightning bamboo, but still felt uncertain. Han Li walked at the very front as if he were unaware of their attention. However, this wasn't because he sought to be some hero, but rather that the ghost fog filled the entire area. Since there would be no difference if he walked at the very back, he may as well walk at the front and get a better grasp of any incoming danger. As for the lightning, it was merely a result of using the bamboo cloudswarm sword's chi to protect his body. By using the protective sword barrier divine ability of his azure essence sword arts, he was able to draw on his flying sword's might without releasing his magic treasures. This was a technique Han Li had only recently comprehended. With the gold lightning bamboo's devilbane properties, this ghost fog posed no threat. Of course, Han Li didn't display the entire might of the gold lightning bamboo, causing the arcs of lightning to be a faint white. As such, he didn't have to fear others recognizing the gold lightning bamboo. In addition, he had also released his immensely powerful spiritual sense since he had entered the ghost fog to warn him of any lurking dangers from ghosts. After all, they couldn't see through the dense ghost fog with only their eyes. However, the tracks of the black-robed man were exceptionally easy to follow. He left behind a 3-meter-wide trail of far thinner fog. It was so obvious, they could follow after it with their eyesight alone. While it was unknown whether this was caused by the black-robed man's technique or the weeping soul beast, Han Li didn't care in the slightest. He just didn't feel like thinking about it. The more ferocious this weeping soul beast was, the more beneficial it was for them while following after it. As he expressionlessly watched his surroundings, he took careful steps forward due to the exceptionally bumpy terrain. He also felt a dampness at his feet as if the air was extremely humid. Thus, they continued walking for an unknown amount of time without encountering any mishaps. But as they unwittingly followed after the black-robed man in the ghost fog, the color of the ghost fog gradually turned black. As this went on, Han Li's expression gradually became gloomier before he started to frown. With a large crack, Han Li suddenly stopped and lowered his head. Fairy Violet Spirit and the old man curiously walked forward to see what had happened. Han Li narrowed his eyes, but his expression soon returned to normal. He had merely stepped on a pile of bones. The bones were wearing clothing that was surrounded in a layer of azure light, appearing quite unordinary. At its side, there were shattered fragments of a sword. From its incisive luster, it seemed as if it still possessed a spiritual nature. It was a cultivator that had fallen here. A flicker of emotion shined from Han Li's eyes as he shook his head. With the magic treasure fragments still holding spirit so many years after their death, this cultivator must have had an impressive cultivation. But this person's body being left unattended after death was truly vastly different than the grandeur they had held during life. It was truly pitiful. If those who tread the path of immortality aren't careful, they would be eternally doomed to a miserable end. As for this cultivator's soul, it should have become a portion of the ghost fog or turned into a malicious spirit. It would be quite difficult for it to enter the path of reincarnation. As Han Li lamented, he casually turned his gaze to the other two. Fairy Violet Spirit's face had turned pale, but when she saw Han Li look at her, she forced out a smile. Ji Li's expression was quite odd. He gazed at the azure clothes for a long while with a creased brow before suddenly flicking his finger and throwing an egg-sized fireball at the remains. Upon contacting the remains, the fireball was extinguished with a flash. "Sigh, it really is him." Ji Li raised his head and muttered to himself with a sad expression. "Does fellow Taoist Ji recognize him?" Han Li indifferently asked as he looked at the skeleton with raised eyebrows. Fairy Violet Spirit also displayed great curiosity. This person should be Taoist Master Yu, who I had met several times before. He had entered core formation far earlier than I had. His fire-repulsing robes were refined from 100-year ice silk, so common flames would have no effect on it, and it was somewhat well known. I had heard he entered the Heaven Void Halls the last time it had opened, but he had never returned. I didn't expect that he had fallen here, unfortunate enough to not even pass the first trial. Ji Li let out a long sigh. Han Li was silent for a while before suddenly asking a question that left the old man shocked. Was the cultivation and magic treasure of Taoist Master Yu far greater than yours? Ji Li seemed to understand what Han Li meant and twirled his beard for a moment before speaking with certainty. Although Taoist Master Yu was an early core formation cultivator such as myself, at the time it was said he was about to break through to mid-core formation. As such, his magic power should be far greater than my own. In addition, he possessed rarely seen ice attribute mutated spiritual roots. His ice cultivation arts should be far superior to my own. As for his magic treasure, I hadn't seen it used in a fight, so I have no way of knowing, but it shouldn't have been any weaker than mine. As the old man spoke, his expression became increasingly unsightly. Since it's like that, then there must be a formidable enemy nearby. I had originally felt it quite odd that, since we've followed the Weeping Soul Beast's path, we hadn't encountered any ghosts or malicious spirits apart from the ghost fog. It seems that we can't expect the black-robed man to always clear the way on our behalf, Han Li said with a solemn expression. Chapter 439, Ghost King 1. When Fairy Violet Spirit heard Han Li, her face paled in an instant. The old man looked at the white bones in silence with shifting eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking about. Han Li looked around and indifferently concluded, since a cultivator on the verge of mid-core formation had fallen here, a fierce ghost with fearsome cultivation is certain to be nearby. Our Lady Violet Spirit and fellow Taoist Ji prepared for the possibility of falling here. If you two turn back now, you won't have to brave this danger. I'm going either way, with or without you. When the two heard Han Li's calm voice, they couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. A while later, Fairy Violet Spirit came to a decision after some thought and resolutely said, Senior Han, even if I were to fall and become a ghost, I cannot return unless I have a way to reach core formation. Her voice revealed great determination. When Han Li heard this, he mentally sighed with reluctant acceptance and turned to look at the old man. Ji Li's expression was continuously changing. After a long while, he dejectedly said, I came here in hopes of acquiring a few life-extending fruits, but I don't wish to risk my life to acquire them. Since the danger is great, this old man will have to turn back. After all, peacefully dying in meditation would be far better than spending eternity as a ghost. After that was said, the old man revealed a trace of shame. Soon after, he cupped his hands to the two and turned back without hesitation. Han Li expressionlessly gazed in the direction that the old man disappeared in, and remained silent for a long while. Fairy Violet Spirit appeared disappointed. With one less core formation cultivator in her party, the ghost mist had become far more dangerous. Elder Han, should we not continue? Fairy Violet looked at the dense fog around her and spoke to Han Li with a forced smile. Although her previous words were resolute, she had no idea whether or not she had made the correct choice. Her mind was now perturbed. Yea, with a flat agreement, he lowered his head to look at the skeleton. With a swipe of his hand, the fire-repulsing robes disappeared into his storage pouch. Fairy Violet Spirit revealed a trace of amazement and was about to say something, but after some further thought, she decided to remain silent. Han Li's following actions surprised the woman even more. Han Li flicked his finger and released a ray of azure swordlight, striking open a 3-meter large hole into the nearby ground. Then, with a sweep of his sleeve, the bones and the magic treasure fragments fell into the hole before being buried. Fairy Violet Spirit's expression became quite odd upon seeing this. Han Li suddenly turned his head to look at her and calmly asked, Are my actions strange? After some hesitation, she truthfully said, Somewhat. Han Li gently smiled and unhurriedly said, I buried him merely because I felt that as a fellow cultivator, there will come a time where I will unknowingly fall and become a pile of bones. Since I've come across someone else's, I may as well lend a hand. I hope that when I fall to misfortune, there will also be someone that will come across my body and bury me. As for his refined robes, the dead have no use for such objects. It would be far too great a pity if they were to be buried. I may as well regard them as compensation for burying the body. Fairy Violet Spirit's amazement faded away before she started to murmur to herself. At that moment, Han Li started to continue his path forward. When Fairy Violet Spirit saw this, she looked at the new burial mound and sighed before slowly following after him. Fellow Taoist Violet Spirit, how much do you know about the history of the Heaven Void Hall? Could you tell me about it? As Han Li had waited for her, they were now leisurely walking side by side. She felt a slightly complicated emotion from seeing Han Li's calm expression. He was only an early core formation cultivator, yet he still appeared so calm in such a dangerous area. How truly unexpected. However, this had also greatly calmed her heart as she felt that Han Li could be relied upon. Han Li's question had startled her for a moment before she obediently replied. The Heaven Void Hall has existed in the scattered star seas for countless years. It is only known to open every 300 years. It will randomly descend at some remote, deserted location in the scattered star seas and is filled with many treasures. Regardless of whether it be spirit medicines, cultivation techniques, or ancient treasures, all can be found here as a result of cultivators from the desolate era building this mysterious hall for unknown reasons. Thus, whenever the hall is opened, many high-grade cultivators would come here in search of treasures. However, the Heaven Void Hall's mechanisms are densely layered in formation spells. As one grows closer to the core of the inner halls, the more treasures one encounters, but the greater the danger. It is said that the items in the inner hall are the Heaven Void Hall's true treasures. However, to come across them, one must pass through 3 great trials. Otherwise, there will be no chance of arriving there. Apart from nascent soul cultivators, only a small number of fortunate cultivators are able to pass through without injury. As a result, the inner halls have become a great mystery towards ordinary cultivators. As Fairy Violet Spirit spoke with her beautiful voice, she carefully watched Han Li's expression. However, she was slightly disappointed to see that Han Li's expression didn't change, causing her to feel that Han Li was somewhat unfathomable. While the Heaven Void Hall has many treasures, shouldn't there be fewer with each opening? Han Li indifferently asked. That is quite unclear, but the Heaven Void Hall is open for only a finite time. Each of its treasures conceal countless secrets. Not a single treasure is a simple item, and their numbers remain many. It is said that anyone that acquires 1 or 2 treasures from here are considered quite fortunate. Normally, cultivators end up only picking a few common spiritual herbs. It depends quite a bit on one's own luck. If that were not the case, the inner halls would have long been swept clean by nascent soul cultivators. Fairy Violet Spirit spoke with uncertainty. Han Li nodded with a stirred expression and remained silent. He slightly hastened his steps. The two continued to follow the black-robed man's trail. After walking for the time it took to finish a meal, nothing strange had occurred. Fairy Violet Spirit had somewhat relaxed as a result. She had come to think that these malicious spirits had traveled a different path than their own, resulting in a lack of encounters. As these thoughts bloomed in Fairy Violet Spirit's mind, Han Li frowned, and he came to an abrupt stop. Fairy Violet Spirit was suddenly alarmed and also stood still. She asked with worry, "What's wrong?" Soon after, she swept her spiritual sense past the nearby area, but she found nothing. With a strange expression flickering through his eyes, Han Li coldly said, "That black-robed man encountered the demon ghost. They are currently fighting." After some hesitation, Fairy Violet Spirit said, "What will we do? Should we go help, or should we take advantage of the opportunity and slip past them?" Han Li looked at the woman and knew that she most likely preferred the latter choice, wanting to slip past them. This choice couldn't be considered incorrect. If they weren't in the middle of the ghost mist, Han Li would have done the same without a second thought. But now, Han Li shook his head and sighed, before walking forward in large strides. When Fairy Violet Fairy saw this, she was stunned for a moment. After some slight consideration, she decided to follow after him. As she followed 100 meters behind him, she faintly heard the sounds of explosions caused from magic techniques and soft sobs. The voice seemed to be that of a woman. Her voice was muffled, shrieking, and seemed to be on the verge of breaking, causing those who heard it to feel extremely on edge and restless. Although she could only faintly hear it, she felt anxious and greatly desired to run away. Fairy Violet Spirit was startled to have felt this, and used a technique to stabilize her primal soul, before daring to wipe away the cold sweat on her chin and raise her head. By the time she looked up, she could no longer see Han Li. Fairy Violet Spirit hesitated for a moment before clenching her teeth and walked forward with a solemn expression. After traveling for a short distance, she unexpectedly caught sight of Han Li's solemn silhouette standing still with his hands behind his back. The woman felt delighted and hastily ran over to him, but before she neared him, she suddenly heard a loud ghostly sob that left her dazed. Her limbs began frantically waving around without any control. The woman's terror drained the blood from her face.